I'm a 24-year-old girl, but at the time of this story, I was about 16, and my younger sister was about 14. We were living in a pretty bad neighborhood, along with my mom, just the three of us, as my four older brothers had moved away and my dad had passed away 3 years prior. The house we lived in was old and in kind of bad shape, but we kept it very clean and nice on the inside. It had its benefits though. It came with a huge backyard. I'm talking one full backyard complete with a garage-sized tool shed that was totally dilapidated and abandoned. But we couldn't afford to tear down and also held sentimental value. Right at the edge of our short metal fence and on the other side of the fence was a large unfenced plot of land that also belonged to us. We called it the back 40. Now, my mom is not mentally all there. She has the mental and emotional capacity of a 15-year-old girl, but she is so stunningly beautiful, few people notice. She's also a bleeding heart, meaning that she was very trusting and wanted to save the world while not making very smart choices and honestly putting her tiny 4'11", 90-pound self in a lot of danger, as well as me and my sister a lot. One of the people she constantly tried to save was her best friend Karen. Karen was your typical white trash. Hardcore, drink a fifth of cheap vodka in the morning type of alcoholic. She would show up at our place hammered a few times a week, sometimes for good/money to hang out. To steal the change off my dresser. You get the idea. Well, one day she shows up with a camper and a borrowed truck. She tells my mom she needs somewhere to keep it, because her new husband kicked her out. I immediately think it's a bad idea. It looks like it hasn't been touched since the 70s. It probably has rats and it's probably stolen. But my mom, being the bleeding heart she is, says fine, you can park it behind the shed. I agree because at least then it won't be an eyesore. Mistake number 1. She parks it between the metal fence and the back of the shed, so just the very end of it and the hitch are visible from the front of the shed. We all kind of forget it exists for a few months. Then one day our cousin abandons a puppy at our house. It's a pit bull and it takes to us immediately. We love him unconditionally and he loves us back just as hard. We don't even mind that he barks at anyone walking by or any new people in the house. He usually barks, sniffs, and then loves them anyways. We begin to feel kind of safe at the house, a feeling I hadn't had since the last of my brothers left home. A few months later, it's summertime and my mom is teaching summer school, so my sister and I are home alone. It's about noon and we decide to go sunbathing in the backyard. We toss on our bikinis, grab towels, and lie out in the sun. Reading and talking, bonding like only a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old can. But I start to feel uneasy. I start to feel like I'm being watched. I don't know why, but I just get the feeling we should go in. My sister is a very nervous girl sometimes, prone to crying and breaking down when she's spooked. She's the baby of 6 kids, can't blame her. And I don't want to alarm her in case it's nothing, so I just tell her I'm hungry and we should go inside. She agrees quickly and I can tell she's rushing as she grabs her stuff. Dang, she feels it too. Probably doesn't want to seem like a baby though. We basically run inside the house. Our kitchen is at the back of the house with a big window above the sink. We stare out of it and we can see the whole backyard. As soon as we're inside, my sister asks if I felt like I was being watched and I said yes. We have a creepy neighbor who is in love with my mom's ex-husband, Karen's ex-husband, who sometimes creeps around the woods next door. My sister says maybe it's him. Normally I would agree, but I knew he was currently in jail for arson. I start to get freaked out and then, out of the corner of my eye, I see a flash of a man near the old camper, behind the fence. It's so far away and he moves so quickly I didn't get a good look. My sister sees it too and freaks out. Our pit bull is too short to see out the window, so he sits calmly at our feet. My sister calls his name and thinking quickly, lets him out the back door. He goes running out, catching the scent of an intruder. Our view is blocked by the shed, but we lock the back door and crack the window, and we watch and listen to him barking viciously. A man's voice saying something, then more barking and a struggle, then nothing. We can't see what's going on, but we are freaking out. I tell my sister to find the house phone. She runs upstairs to look for it. I turn around and lock the front door, double check the windows, and snap the back window shut. I still can't see my dog, and now I can't hear anything either. My heart is pounding. This kind of neighborhood. The cops take hours to come. I'm struck with the memory of calling 911 when my dad collapsed. Before I knew he was dead as soon as he hit the floor from a massive heart attack. Telling the operators my dad was dying. It took them about an hour to show up. What could some man do to us in an hour? I'm so scared because above all else, I love my sister. I grab a steak knife from the counter and hide the rest in a drawer. My sister comes bounding down the stairs, already on the phone, telling the operator what's going on. I tell her to go sit in the living room and try to see if the neighbors are outside, maybe flagging one down. All of a sudden, our dog comes bounding around the side of the shed, happy as a clam. I can see the back door from the window and I check to see if it's clear. It is. He reaches the back door the same time I do and I let him in, slamming the door shut behind him. My sister comes running in and we both examine the dog to see if he's been hurt. What we see at that moment still makes me nauseous to think about. We look at each other embarrassed. I don't know what to say. I don't know if my sister is old enough to know what we are looking at. We are silent until she breaks the quiet. Is that cum on his face? I threw up in the sink. That answers her question. I lift my head from the sink and out the window. I see a man jump the fence towards the back 40 away from us and take off running into the woods that neighbor our house. My sister, still on the phone, doesn't mention what we found on our dog's face. Out of embarrassment, out of fear, maybe because she was scared to admit that she knew what cum looked like. I really don't know. Those are the reasons I don't mention it to the cops who show up 45 minutes later though. I'm assuming her reasons were similar. The cops thoroughly checked the woods, but the guy is long gone. They checked the shed, but it had obviously not been entered in years. Finally, they checked the camper. Somebody had been living in there for a while. Clothes, CDs, CD player, dog toys, food, needles, and other drug paraphernalia were found inside. The dog toys explained how the guy was able to calm us down long enough to mess with him. He was a sucker for a bone or a plushie toy. Police said it was a harmless drifter looking for a place to live and told us to get rid of the camper. And we did that day. I'd like to say my mom learned a lesson, but she didn't. I did though. My sister is tougher than I thought, and she is probably ready for the sex talk. Hi guys, long-time lurker here. My former college roommate recently reminded me of an experience that just might belong here. In 2002, I was attending college full-time and was looking for a job with minimal hours so as to not interfere with my school schedule. At the time, students had access to a free newspaper in the dorms that was filled with coupons, articles, and classifieds. I picked up a copy one day hoping to find a babysitting gig, but a different kind of offer caught my eye. The ad stated a local company was searching for bikini models at the rate of $100 for a 1-hour photo session. Well, I had just signed with a modeling agency back home and had one bikini shoot under my belt already. I liked the idea of pocketing the $100 without giving my manager a cut. And I also figured I could add a photo from this shoot to build my portfolio. So feeling confident, I called the number listed on the ad. Nobody picks up, but the answering machine instructed callers interested in the bikini shoot to leave your phone number and submit a photo to an email address that was provided. The message went on to say that if the company liked what they saw, they would call you if interested. Okay. So I did that later on that evening and hoped to get a call back. The next afternoon, I received a call, and the voice on the other end sounded like a man probably in his 40s or so. He said he would be the photographer on the shoot and said he had a few things to go over with me. But first he asked me to spell my name. Then it got weird. His voice lowered into an aggressive, almost growling tone as he said, "Kat, let's get something clear. I do not allow anyone other than myself and my model in my studio. I will not have someone telling me how to do my job. Hair and makeup people, that shit's on your own time." At this point he was practically yelling. I replied, meekly, "Okay," feeling uncomfortable and shocked. My answer seemed to put him at ease since his voice seamlessly transitioned to, a calmer tone, asking if he could also take some video footage while I was in the studio with him. He said he wanted me to bring a miniskirt and panties so he could shoot upskirt shots and sell them to a team of producers. Okay, nope. At this point I was scared and ready to back out altogether. I said I would like to think about it and hung up the phone, feeling stupid and unnerved by the conversation. I figured since I hung up on him, he wouldn't call me back when the situation was over. The next day, the photographer called me from a different phone number. He sounded elated. "Kat, guess what? The producers want to meet you. I told them how great you were and that this could be a great opportunity. Can you drive to a city an hour away?" I said no thank you. I'd found another job that morning. Thanks for the offer. He was dead silent. "You know what? I bet I could get them to give you 200 instead of 100. There's a wooded area out there where no one could see you, and I bet they would even buy you a bus ticket. I'd pick you up, but my brother has my car." I hung up the phone again, pretty freaked out. About 30 minutes later, I received an email from a woman that supposedly worked for the company that she was allegedly putting together this weird bikini shoot. She introduced herself and immediately started talking up the creep that I had been in contact with, telling me he was so talented and nice. She wrote something like, "Just between us girls, I think he's so cute too." And she attached a picture of the photographer to seemingly prove her point. It was then that I figured it was the photographer posing as a female. The verbiage of the email just sounded off. I never replied and never heard from the dude or his female alter ego again. So yeah, extremely creepy photographer. Keep the money and the psycho tendencies and let's not meet. Oh yeah, and this took place in Orlando. I feel that is something I should have added. My friend June and I were 15 or younger when we used to hang out all summer, riding her quad down to the river by ourselves. Her father didn't really care how long we were gone, as long as we were safe. But he worked nights as a prison guard in a different city, so he wouldn't really know if we were either way. Well, usually things went fine. We stayed on the quad, messed around like teenagers do, got in the water and went home. We almost always brought June's dog, Bo, and he was always useful to keep creeps away because of his size. He was a bloodhound. However, one day we stayed later than usual and it was getting pretty dark. We'd stayed late before, but we didn't like to do it often, so we packed up and left. We got all the way home, put Bo away in the house, locked the quad up, and realized that June didn't have her cell phone on her. Determined not to be murdered by her dad in the morning when he found out she'd lost her phone, we decided to go back for the phone. Unfortunately, the quad was low on gas at this point though, so we had to take the 2 spare bicycles. At first, we were only panicking because June's phone was missing, because that's a pretty big deal all by itself, but our unease grew as we rode past 2 vehicles that hadn't been on the path to the river before. The trucks were parked next to each other, and as we went by, the men exchanged goods of some sort. One of the men stuck something down his pants, and I was pretty sure I'd just seen my first drug deal, and I'd always been taught that I would die for that. I didn't know though, obviously. June waved at the men, which I remember cringing inwardly at. I don't know why I thought it was a bad idea, but I strongly believed that it would get us in trouble. We made our way to the area where we'd been sitting, searched the few places we thought it could be, and eventually found the small silver device. It was on some river rocks, thankfully unharmed, though from its position it must have fallen off of the quad. We tried to go around where we knew the vehicles to be by going through the brush, since we knew the area pretty well and we were both extremely uneasy. There was a rustle in the bushes to our right, and we both froze. My heart was pounding in my chest as I almost made direct eye contact with something. Its eyes were glowing. I let all of my air out at once. It was just a deer. It ran toward us, and despite knowing what it was now, we screamed a little bit. We gave up on going around. It was too dark, and nature would always be one step ahead of us, we decided. This was in early high school. We didn't have flashlights on our phones to see with. To our dismay, on our way back on the original path, the vehicles were there, or at least one of them was. It's hard to remember in all honesty, and it still creeps me out to talk about the situation. We were sure that we were going to get killed, kidnapped, or worse. I remember seeing headlights pointed at us, and we rode our bikes to the right as quickly as we could. But I was always the weaker of the two of us, so I was falling behind. June was yelling at me to hurry up, and I'm pretty sure I had started crying at that point. I was so sure that if they had got one of us, it would be me. We got ahead of them enough to reach a slight curvature in the blackberry bushes that separated this part of the path from the main area, and June grabbed my hand to pull me down into the bushes. The thorn scraped against my exposed skin. I always wore shorts with my bikinis, but the rest of me was still open to the weapons of the bushes. It was worth it though because they couldn't see us. We could hear them though. They idled their car nearby, got out, looked around a little bit. Where did they go? Did you see where they went? I thought they went this way. They got back in the car eventually and the headlights faded further, closer to the river, further from our way home. So we bolted. We grabbed our bikes and we pedaled as fast as our legs could take us. We hoped so hard that we wouldn't be followed. We finally made it home safely, locked the gate to the yard and went inside, and we watched the road for a while. Nobody went by. Eventually, we left the window alone. It was late. We went to the river the next day. It was a usual thing. There was something different, though, about the blackberries that we had been hiding in. They'd been crushed, ran over multiple times by a car until they were almost completely flat. I don't like to think about what would have happened if we had stayed in our oh-so-perfect hiding spot any longer. I have this friend. I'll just use his first letter R, who I believe has been stalking me for the past 2 weeks, if not longer. I'll give some background info, and then get into the problem that I'm in. Thanks in advance for any advice and help. We met back in 2014 in high school. He was always a quiet but nice and easygoing guy. We grew very close, and I saw him as a brother. He didn't have a very smooth childhood. He saw his parents argue a lot, often for years. His mom even cheated on his dad, and he saw the effect it had on him and the whole family. But you wouldn't suspect anything out of the ordinary just meeting him at first. Around 2016, he started to become a bit paranoid and would seem a bit pessimistic at times. He never had many friends. Neither did I for that matter. We had 2 other friends together that we saw often, and we were the only ones he trusted. I saw him have this strange panic attack where he ran out of a restaurant we were at, and he ran to a nearby park and yelled at people. I called his dad to come get him, and he got him in the car and gave him a pill. Apparently, this had been the second time this happened recently then. Fast forward to June 2021, in between that last episode and attack and now, R seemed normal as could be. But I noticed he was a bit off and has been since then. He met a girl in college months before that he says he fell madly in love with, but she rejected him when he asked her on a date and blocked him on everything right after graduation. Apparently it took a massive toll on his emotional and mental state. He had another episode where he ran outside his house and actually provoked someone, and they punched him in self-defense, and then his parents took him to the hospital during that summer, and he was officially diagnosed with schizophrenia. So from late 2021 until now, I've noticed he's quieter, still cracks jokes, and can have a decent conversation with him and still seems like a nice guy. But there's some stuff recently that I truly think is alarming, and this is why I'm making this post. So I'll cut to the chase. For the last 6 weeks, we've hung out 3 times. This was actually after a hiatus where we didn't see each other since February this year because I started working more hours and went to the night shift. In each of those 3 hangouts, I've noticed he looks at me in a really strange way. Like he's horny and imagining me naked or imagining him hurting me. We are both male and heterosexual, by the way. Saying this to preface what I'll mention in a bit. He also mentions how he's still in love with that girl from school, but proceeds to call her all kinds of names, like slut and whatnot, and wants to assault and kill her right after. He has said this numerous times and even mentions going to the elementary school she goes to. He sent me a picture of that school on Google Maps with arrows pointed at it and firework emojis last week. He also admitted to having parked outside her home and sitting there for hours about 5 times back in 2021. For the past week, he's been insisting on hanging out several times a day, and when I was at Chili's with my parents on Saturday, he sent me a message saying, "Chili's." He's able to see me since I'm on the Snap Map on Snapchat, since I use the app often to talk to other friends. When I went to the mall right after, he said, "You are going to the mall again. You were there yesterday." Which is true. I went to the mall twice, once with mom and then with both my parents the day later to get some stuff since one of our favorite stores was closing, so we wanted to check out good deals. On the drive home that day, he messaged me saying, "You didn't work today. We should have hung out." I replied, "Maybe Wednesday," which was yesterday, and I didn't see him because I'm genuinely creeped out. So the day after, on Sunday, he again insisted on seeing me, but I went to go play soccer instead with other friends, and then went to go do laundry afterwards. And when I was at the laundromat, he sent me a soccer ball emoji and a laundry emoji, indicating he saw me on the Snap Map. Here's the thing, he keeps mentioning where I am, and it's always within like 10 minutes of me being on my phone. He's actually done this for the last 2 years, but never this frequently. It used to be like twice a month and I brushed it off, but now I'm noticing something actually concerning. He has also been calling me boyfriend and sending heart emojis the past week, and when I told him I might see him this week, which I won't, but I said so just to not make him mad because I'm actually fearful of him hurting me or others, he said, "You think I can wait that long to see my boyfriend?" This past Sunday, I didn't reply to him for 4 hours, and he kept asking if I'm mad and then said he wants me to reply no longer than a minute after he texts me each time. I have the feeling he's just constantly on his phone, looking for when I'm active on social media, and I really don't know why. He also admitted to me a month ago that he makes fake profiles to be able to gain access to that one girl's Instagram and looks at her pictures. And he even said that he masturbates to them. He said he uses the nudity apps to take her clothes off, he said. All of this is concerning. He currently doesn't have a job and hasn't had one for the last 2 years. I'm the only friend he sees and talks to, and I feel like he's developed a compulsion or fixation, or dependence, or mix of all three on me. And as I mentioned, he has said he wants to assault and kill the girl that used to be in his class. And he knows where she lives and he knows where she works. I have not mentioned my thoughts on this to him again out of fear. He currently takes risperidone daily, and he said he's been seeing a new therapist for just a month now, but I don't know if any of those are even working. I'm asking for any advice on how to approach this and what to do. My concern is that if I tell anyone like the police or the girl, he will find out and retaliate by hurting me or my family, as he knows where I live. Any help is appreciated. Also, if any of you think it's best to actually delete this in case he sees it, let me know. As I know, he has had Reddit before, but I am using a brand new account. Feel free to message me too. Edit. Okay, essentially, he kept asking why I'm not on the map anymore, and I got a bit ticked off and confronted him in a nice and civil way. And he pretty much said that all this stuff were jokes and he doesn't want to harm anyone. But I don't buy it. I feel like he's in denial. Any help? Final edit. He's in a mental ward, thankfully. Well, it's my cake day, and to celebrate, I present you this tale of nerdy horror. I am a complete nerd, and to prove this, I used to LARP heavily. You meet all kinds of people LARPing. The city I played in was near a military base, so there were a few Marines in our game. I'm a very outgoing person and make friends easily. I was well liked at the game, and I guess I caught the eye of one of the LARPers, named Nick Soros. At first we were just acquaintances, just role-playing vampires along with a group of other people. Then he introduced me to a friend of his who I ended up babysitting for a number of times. I became good friends with her because of it. Fast forward. Nick, our mutual friend Melly, her husband, another couple, and I all went out to a Puerto Rican club one night. I was very attached to my Zune at the time and brought it with me everywhere. Well, me being the lush I am, I had drunk a decent amount that night and gotten a ride back home to my house from Nick. I ended up drunkenly leaving my Zune in his car, and when I noticed it was missing, I called him up and asked him to return it. He came to my house to drop it off and stupidly told me he had come across a topless photo I took. Me plus whiskey plus camera equals topless picture. At least at that time. But I digress. He told me he came across this picture while checking out my Zune to see if I wanted to buy one. His words. I tried to find the picture he was referring to. It turns out you had to scroll down to the 13th gallery and then scroll down to the last picture. Obviously, he was scoping out my pictures. I felt violated. I decided to ignore him because I was mad that he invaded my privacy in a way. A week later, my friend Danielle, a mutual friend of Melly and me, was over at my house. We had a thing for each other at the time. I was dyeing my hair red, blue, and black that night, and she was helping me. Around 10 p.m. that night, Nick calls. I ignore it. Then he called again, and again. Up until the point where he would call, I wouldn't pick up, and then he would call immediately after. I was flying out to Florida to see my biological family the next morning from an airport about 2 to 3 hours away. I decided to pick up the phone and fake being asleep. I tried to convince him I was asleep and I had a flight early tomorrow, which was bending the truth a little bit. My flight wasn't that early in the morning. After I hung up the phone, he called back. Danielle had had enough. She picked up the phone. It was my cell phone, by the way, and told him off. When she hung up, we looked at each other and decided to go outside and have a cigarette. So we go outside my house and talk about Nick and how convoluted it was that he wouldn't leave me alone. I live on a cul-de-sac and my parents' house is near the end of it. My back is to the street and Danielle is facing me. Mid-sentence, her face changes expressions and she says, "What the heck?" I turn around to look at the street and I see someone walking towards us down the street. It's Nick. I decide to meet him at the bottom of my driveway. He basically says it's bullcrap that I've been ignoring him and we need to discuss our problems. By this time, Danielle is at my side and starts caressing my arm to give him a hint. This fellow isn't too bright and doesn't get it. Then he brings it down a notch. He quietly and softly says my name and that we should talk. I almost cave, but suddenly Danielle links arms with me and leads me back to my house. Our backs are to Nick and we're next to my parents' car. Danielle is on my left side. I see her go down on the hood of the car out of the corner of my eye. And I hear her scream, "Get your effing hands off me." Then I feel an arm around my neck and something pressed against my temple. At this point I think I should be scared, so I force myself to cry for effect. As I'm being pulled up the street, I realize there's a gun to my head. That's when I really start to cry. Meanwhile, Danielle has gone back into my house and alerted my parents to the situation. My brave younger sister ventures outside to see what exactly is going on. She sees Nick dragging me up the street and reports to my mom that he has a gun. My mom and my across the street neighbor both call 911 and my dad comes outside to mediate the situation. He saved my life that night. Now at this point things start to blur because I'm so damn terrified. My dad comes out and says something to Nick about letting me go or something. Around this time, my legs finally give out and I drop to the ground. Nick points the gun at my dad and says, "Stop or I'll shoot you." Then he points it at me and threatens to shoot me. My dad is trying to talk to Nick and reason with him, all the while yelling at me to come back to the house where it's safer. I can't move. I'm frozen, crying and screaming. I finally find it in me to move, so I crawl to the sidewalk. Then a little bit while later, I get an adrenaline rush and run to my house. There's a big pile of dirt at the edge of my front yard where a fence used to be, and of course I don't see it and I trip over it. By now, Danielle has come back outside and is hiding behind her car. I happen to fall near her and she drags me behind her car with her. I'm still crying and I can hear my dad scream, "No, Nick, don't do that." I bursted out crying harder than before. Then I hear it. A helicopter. We're saved. Then a few minutes later, 5 cop cars came barreling down my quiet little street. Eventually, Nick gives up and is apprehended. The cops then secure the scene. Danielle, my dad, and I are told to get down on our knees with our hands up. My dad and I have a Kodak moment at this time as we hold hands in midair. Fast forward to me giving my statement to the main police officer in charge. His cop car is at the top of the street. As I'm talking, I realize we're right next to Nick's car. I point it out to him. In his car, the cops found ammunition, rope, a knife, and binoculars. Nick told the cops flat out what his plans were that night. Apparently, he was going to kidnap us, bind and gag us, assault Danielle and ditch her, and talk to me. I call shenanigans. I know if he had me against my will, he would have his way with me. Sorry for the length. I felt the need to go into detail. Oh, and he got 10 years in prison in Northern California. For those of you wondering what happened to me as a result of this, I developed PTSD and severe paranoia, and I'm scared to death to walk alone at night. I constantly check over my shoulder to see if anyone is following me. I have a severe phobia of getting assaulted now and dissociative identity disorder. So basically, because of this dude, I hallucinate and hear voices, and I'm afraid of being by myself at night. So this happened to me several years ago when I was in middle school. I'd been invited to my best friend's little sister's birthday party as her one person that she got to invite. My family dropped me off and they went to a family reunion that I hadn't been very interested in going to. Let me preface this story by saying that even though I love my best friend, and we are still best friends to this day, her family and their friends were basically rednecks. I live in the South, so it's not exactly a surprise. I didn't know anyone at the party other than my friend, her mom and stepdad, and her little sister. Her parents had a few friends there, and there were a few other random family members. After I get dropped off, I head inside with my friend. She tells me that they are going to be setting up a kid pool for her little sister in the front yard, and if I wanted to help watch the kids and hang out with her in the pool, I could borrow one of her swimsuits. She forgot to tell me before I came, so I didn't come with one of my own. I said sure. It was really hot that day and there wasn't much else for me and her to do anyways. I picked out a bikini and I remember it being a little bit big because my friend's mom had to help me tighten the strings on it. We all head outside. They set up the pool and everybody gets settled in their lawn chairs in the pool. Now, since the pool was one of those little blow-up ones that are maybe 8 feet long and barely 2 feet deep, I just ended up walking around it with a pool net thing, just getting leaves out when they fell in. I think my friend was sitting down in the pool and we were talking. The adults were just talking amongst themselves. I remember one of the adults seeming a little bit creepy looking, but I wasn't really paying attention to him much. After a while, we go back in the house and one of the older ladies pulls me aside. She told me that I shouldn't worry, but she wanted to tell me that the creepy looking dude had taken pictures of me on his phone while I was in the pool. She confronted him about it once she noticed, and he deleted all of the pictures. She told me that she didn't believe him though, and when he wasn't looking, she took his phone and actually deleted all of them. She explained that he probably would have shown his buddies the pictures of me to brag about how he did something with me. Or to me, really. Remember, I was in middle school and I have always looked younger than I actually am. This terrified me, but I tried to push it out of my mind, and I ended up not telling my parents because I thought they would never let me back at my friend's house again. Actually, to this day, they still don't know. Later, my friend told me that her stepdad had a serious talk with his friend about what he did, and I'm pretty sure he sort of cut him off after that. Sort of like a last straw type of thing. Looking back, I will always wonder why on earth he took pictures of me and what would have happened if the lady hadn't seen him taking them. Part of me thinks it was simply because I was in a skimpy bikini, and I was one of the only young girls there that wasn't a child. But it also scares me to think about what he could have done with the photos, or what he would have done to me if there weren't so many people around. So, creepy photographer, let's not meet again. I'm a very open-minded person. I don't like to judge books by their cover because so many do. I like to meet new people, and sometimes more off individuals take advantage of that. My family attributes it to the way that I dress interestingly or the fact that I'm very friendly. Well, this time it backfired. At the time, I was a sophomore and a theater major in college, so I was constantly in the arts building. One day, I get a friend request from this kid named Paul on Facebook. I saw that he was friends with a lot of my fine arts major friends, the year under me. So, I confirmed it. He started sending me pretty friendly messages, saying that he often saw me in the art building and wanted to say hello, but was awkward. No shit. Being the person I am, I kept it loose and cordial. One day, I was sitting outside a building on campus after Italian doing homework before my next class. From the corner of my eye, I see someone approaching very slowly. I lift my head and there's Paul. He slowly says, Monster Mash-up, right? As if it wasn't me. Yeah. Hi, Paul. I say with way too much warmth, trying to keep it light. When I say awkward, I mean as awkward as you can get, but I didn't want to judge or be rude. He also had this distinct character to his voice. Very bizarre and kind of like a villain in a movie. He had crazy curly hair and always carried around his sketchbook. He always came up with a reason to show me new sketches and to tell me super personal things about his life, despite me not knowing him. His sketches freaked me out. Not that I displayed that, and they were usually violent and full of ugly cartoonish women, often topless or naked. On that first day and from that day on, when he would specifically find me outside that building on those days, he would insist on walking next to me to my next class. Kind of started avoiding that spot. I really needed the time to get things done. He still continued to send me long personal messages trying to get to know me. He also commented on how pretty I was in my pictures. I started to get pretty uncomfortable with his aggressiveness. He would try to set up times for us to hang out, and I just really tried to avoid that as much as possible. I was in a play in a company outside of school at the time, and he showed up one night by himself, totally baked. Occasionally, I would glance at him and he would be staring at me. He sent me a message after the show saying I was the best looking one in the production. Shortly after that, I got a message with a link to a picture he drew of me. He had based it on one from my Facebook. To be honest, it was pretty cool and very colorful. Not at all like his other pictures. Then I got a message from him admitting his strong feelings for me. Kind of figured that was coming, but I politely told him that I appreciated his feelings and his friendship, but I was already seeing someone. My then long-term boyfriend. Oops. He freaked out, telling me that I was awful and he did all of those things for me. Coming to my show, drawing me a picture, telling me personal stuff I didn't want to know, that he never trusts anyone and I broke that. And that he was going through a lot already and his dad just died that summer. That escalated quickly. I attempted to stay friendly and rational, but that didn't work at all. He cursed me out and blocked me. On campus, whenever I would see him, he would make a 90-degree turn and walk in a different direction. If I happened to be close, I would see him scramble to get away. About a year ago, so 3 to 4 years after that whole thing happened, I got a random message from a blank profile with the name Paul that said, "Thank you for contributing to my hatred of women." Really? Little ol' me did all of that. What a jerk. Funny thing is, he was at another show I was in with the same company recently and sat in the front row, slinking all the way down in his chair. Nope, can't see you at all, buddy. I also randomly see him around the city and it still sends a shiver up my spine. I often wonder if he ever drew me like those other women in his sketches or what he did to my picture. I'm 24 now, but remembered this recently and was telling my boyfriend the story about a week ago. When I was around 16 years old, a friend and I stayed over at a mutual friend's house. I live in a somewhat rural area, so there are houses around, but it's not very crowded. About half a mile or so from our friend's house, there was access to a swimming area. I think we called it coma water because it was kind of dank and, hey, we were silly kids and we thought it was hilarious. But we threw our bikinis on anyway and headed down to the calm water. As the three of us walked through the field alongside a residential road behind our friend's house on our way to swim, we noticed a black sedan with two older men that we'd never seen before, possibly in their 30s or 40s, drive past us and slow down. We shared a look of disgust and thought the standard. Creepy old men. That girls get used to thinking from a very young age, but we didn't dwell on it. We swam for about an hour and a half and decided to head back. We left, talking and laughing, and took the same route home, past a cluster of houses. We made it less than halfway back when we saw reverse lights turn on down a subsidiary road. We all looked to see the same black sedan pull out and start driving toward us. We froze. I don't know who finally broke. It may have been me, but one of us screamed, "Run back!" Up ahead was just an open field, to our left was an open field, and to our right the car was approaching. Going back was our only option. We ran as fast as we could in our bikinis and flip-flops and knocked on the first door that we found. An older couple on their way to church opened the door and we breathlessly begged them to help us, knowing the car would still be waiting for us if we tried to walk or even run back. They were taken completely off guard, but eventually agreed to put towels down on their back seat and drive us back up to my friend's house. As an adult now, I'm sure they were scanning the area for anyone suspicious, but I pretty much blacked out during the car ride from the adrenaline. They made sure we got into the house safely, and we locked every possible entrance before calling the police. A state trooper came by about an hour later to take a statement from us. Our story and descriptions of the men in their car lined up with recent abductions of teenage girls of our age in the area. The cop didn't say it directly, but we were lucky that we were together and aware of our surroundings. I tried to find articles to corroborate this, but no such luck. Too many abductions to sort through. Hey everyone, I hope you're having a nice day. This encounter took place a year and a half ago, but I kinda want to share. So, it was a nice October evening. I was still in my senior year of high school. 16 female. I was attending some evening English classes at the time. I'm from a non-English speaking country, but I decided to skip since I was kind of worn out from all of the studying. Instead, I went to my favorite half library, half shop establishment in a mall. I actually went there on purpose to buy a Hunter Thompson book since I was and still am a huge fan of his works. However, once I came there, I noticed they had a concert evening, and some small hippie band was singing just near the shelves I needed to go to. This library is a two-story establishment, with the second floor being really small and like a balcony. Basically, it was a big square first floor, and the second floor was as if this square was cut from the inside. I'm sorry, I can't explain it well, but the point is, you could see the whole library from any spot. There weren't any separate rooms. So I just get to the second floor and browse the biography and memoir shelves, thinking how I could get to my desired book. Nobody was even sitting near the band, so I anticipated that I wasn't allowed to get near them. There were a couple more people near me, but I didn't pay attention. Suddenly, a man came up behind me and said, "Excuse me, can I look at these books?" Being that I wasn't really interested in any of those and looked through them just to kill some time, I immediately replied something like, "Yes, of course," and shifted slightly to the right. When the man was directly near me, I could get a good look at him. The first thing I thought upon checking him out was that he looked very much like Mads Mikkelsen, maybe a slightly uglier version of him. He was well dressed and looked normal and presentable. I didn't think anything of him, but then he started talking to me. Asked something like, "Hey, what are you up to? Why are you here?" I was a little bit shocked since this man was obviously a lot older than me and I've always looked my age, maybe even a little bit younger. But I went along, replying something like, "Yeah, I'm here to get this book, but there's a band here and I don't know if I can get to it." He asked for my name. I was smart enough to give him a fake one. Then he started very eagerly talking about the author and gonzo journalism. And from his body language, I immediately understood what he was up to. My mother is a psychologist, so she taught me a lot of things about people and whatnot, so I picked up on his intentions very fast. This man was after me. He made small talk. I was obviously uncomfortable, but didn't know how to get out of this situation. He was talking nonstop, trying to hang on to me, and when at one point my phone buzzed, it just caught Wi-Fi. I thought somebody was calling me and turned around. He asked me if he was bothering me. Being a little bit polite myself, I said no with a little fake laugh. I should have just brushed him off, really. So then came a really disturbing point when he asked for my age. I cheerily replied that I was 16, which, by the way, was true, thinking that would scare him away. But no, he didn't care that I was a minor. He just happily replied that he was 46. It got creepier for me, and when he offered to chat over coffee, I said something in the lines of, "But I'm just 16. I can't really hang around older men." To this, he replied something I remember very well with a very serious expression. "That's old enough. You were also just so attractive, that's why I approached you." At this point, I was hysterical on the inside. I mean, I knew that this guy couldn't try anything in a fairly crowded shop, but it was still scary. So I obediently went to a little dining lobby in the corner of the library, trying to brainstorm any strategies of retreat. Maybe it was a dumb idea, but I decided to say, "Oh, I actually have a dance class soon. I'll be late if I don't go now. So I'll get the book and we'll be going." He took it well and waited for me. I went straight for the book. I didn't even care about the band anymore. While I was at the counter paying for it, I really hoped I could slip away, but this man waited just behind me when I was about to book it out the door. He started asking me about my dance classes, what style I was learning, where my dance studio was at. I tried to give the vaguest answers I could, so he just dropped it and came straight to the point, scheduling a date. He kept rambling about this new bubble tea place, desperate to try to drag me into this. I just replied that it wasn't a good idea, and when he asked, "When then?" I just threw a never at him and speed walked away. He mumbled an "oh, okay then," and went the opposite way. Needless to say, it's not that creepy and really anticlimactic, but I was pretty shaken that evening. I don't even know why. I've always been catcalled a lot and hit on by older men, but this particular encounter was pretty unnerving, even though I don't think anything of it now. Every time I look at the book, I remember this man. I hope we never meet again. And yeah, one last thing. I learned a valuable lesson from this. Screw being polite in situations like this. I had just finished my shift working as a receptionist for a gym. I worked the opening shift, so I was there from 4:30 a.m. until around 11 a.m. I hadn't slept at all the night before, so I decided to order an Uber so that I could get home as soon as possible. When I got into the car, he noticed my uniform and started asking me about my work. My boss, co-workers, and the customers, he kept asking if they were fit. Good-looking guys. I'm usually okay with idle chit-chat with Uber drivers, but this 20 questions game was a bit much. He then became insistent that I should use my looks to get promoted by flirting with my boss. Said things like, "Just promise that you'll sleep with him if he gives you a raise," and "Meathead guys are so stupid, they will do anything for a girl who smiles at them." I made a disgusted face and said I wasn't interested in sleeping with my boss, trying to deter the conversation. He said, "You don't actually have to do it. Just get the raise, and then if he tries anything, threaten to take him to HR." I kept saying I wouldn't do anything like that, and I found that kind of thing inappropriate. And he kept insisting that it was the only way to get ahead of my other female coworkers, and if I were a smart woman, I would use the advantages society gave me. At that point, I was completely done listening to him, but wasn't any closer to my home, so I stopped responding. He then said, "Oh, I get it. You're a good girl type. You are probably waiting for Prince Charming to take interest in you and beg you to marry him." Again, I said nothing. I'm not the type to defend myself to someone I'll never see again. He then went on a rant about how all marriages are a sham and it's impossible for any human to be monogamous with one person because it's just not in their instincts to only sleep with one person, and that I would be wasting my time being celibate because I should be doing it with as many men as possible since I'm biologically made to breed and take care of children, and that I would feel much more fulfilled if I just did that. This dude actually said all that out loud. Couldn't believe it. We finally made it to my address, and he turned around and asked if I had an Instagram and if he could follow it, then asked if I would rate him 5 stars. I told him I didn't have an Instagram and got out of the car and kept walking up the street, past my house until he drove away. I want to start this off by saying that I don't condone any of the behavior of what my friends and I did on this particular night. I'm well aware that this whole thing could have been avoided had my friends and I not have been such dumbasses. I made a huge mistake as well. It was midsummer, like the second week of August to be exact. My parents were gone for the weekend for some wedding out of town, and I had the house to myself. As a 17-year-old, I was pretty happy about being alone for the weekend. My parents trusted me too, because I wasn't really the type of kid to get into trouble, really. I mean, I had a few screw-ups here and there at school, but nothing major. I didn't smoke or drink at all, and neither did most of my friends. But this night was different. It all started out as a normal night of me playing on my Xbox with my friends, when one of them mentioned that we should sneak out. I wasn't necessarily opposed to this idea, but I wasn't really fond of it, nor was I that interested. It didn't sound like much fun to me. What were we going to do anyway? Walk around outside? Then what, you know? That's when Elias mentioned we should do something a little crazy. There was this house down the street that was abandoned, or so we thought at the time. We weren't 100% sure. Some weird girl that used to ride our bus for years lived there, but they must have moved out because one day she stopped getting on the bus. And after a few months, this house looked like a ghost town. The grass was really overgrown, and you could tell the property wasn't being maintained at all. Elias convinced me to go, so I told him I was down, and I asked him what our plan was. He told me we'll figure it out when we get there. The house sits on a corner of 2 intersecting back roads in the country. It's a 2-story white house with a big garage behind it. We rode our bikes there because it was kind of far to walk. When we got there, we immediately hit our bikes and ran up to the back door. But of course, it was locked. We then tried the front door as well, but it was also locked. We ran back to the back door, and we were going to try to kick it down, or break the handle with a sledgehammer that we found sitting on the side of the property. We started by kicking the door, but it wasn't budging, so we went to plan B. Elias started hitting the door handle, and after like 5 or 6 swings, he finally cracked it. We opened the door and slowly stepped inside. All we had was the flashlights on our phones to see. It was pitch black in there, and the house was an absolute mess. There were things scattered all around the floor, and it was nasty. Definitely not clean by any standards at all. As soon as we walked in, we noticed a door that was adjacent to the door we walked in from. It led to the downstairs area. Took a peek down there. Holy shit, dude. This place looks like something straight out of a horror movie. That gave me the creeps. I wasn't feeling ballsy enough to check it out down there yet. Not until we at least checked out the rest of the house anyways. We scavenged our way through the house and we didn't find much. Just a bunch of clutter and useless shit scattered around. We then walked upstairs and checked out all the rooms. Alright bro, we might as well just leave, I said. Wait, did you hear that? Elias asked. What? Did I hear what? Shh, listen, dumbass. I froze in fear when I heard what he was talking about. Dude, there's somebody in here. Shut the fuck up, Devin, Elias said. Jesus, man, you're gonna get us caught, idiot. We sat and listened for a little while as the noise continued. It sounded like somebody was rummaging through a bunch of boxes or drawers or something. Then what we feared most was coming true. We heard steps heading towards the stairs. Shit, bro, let's go, I said. We ran to one of the rooms and Elias hid in the closet, but I, on the other hand, started to open the window. I was making a lot of noise, but I didn't really care. My only focus was getting the hell out of the house. Wait, dude, what are you doing? Don't freaking leave, what the heck? Come on, bro, I said. We gotta go. That's when I jumped out the window. I hung onto the windowsill and I dropped down as carefully as possible. I hurt my leg pretty bad, but I landed better than I expected I would. Elias started yelling and told me to wait for him, so I did. Hurry up, man. You don't have much time, I said. That was when I ran behind a tree to try and camouflage myself. After that, Elias made a leap and he didn't land as well as I did, and he ended up hurting himself worse. Luckily, he was still able to limp a little on his own. He made his way over to the tree and he sat down to catch his breath. Bro, we seriously have to go, I said. Are you okay, by the way? He just looked at me with an obvious look that read no, he obviously wasn't okay. Suddenly, we heard some people talking next door. Thankfully, it was the neighbors. We started walking that way. Keep in mind, this was the country and the houses were pretty far apart. We realized we couldn't look to them for help though, considering we technically just committed a crime. I think we felt a form of comfort though, realizing there were other people out there if it came down to a life or death situation. We walked a ways further from the vacant house and found a better hiding spot to hang tight at while we got Elias's ankle situated. After a few minutes, we started to hear a bunch of loud noises and people yelling from the house that we had just broken into. There must have been 4 or 5 people in there. Then bam, out of nowhere. There were like 10 to 15 rounds let off of what sounded like an AR-15 or something crazy like that. We started to freak the hell out and we ended up running away as fast as we could, with Elias's ankle being the way it was. We had to take a long walk back home. I'm talking about a 3.5-mile detour. Practically the whole way home I had to carry my half-mobile friend, who could barely even limp anymore without my help. It took us a good couple hours to get home, and we heard more gunshots from those crazy rednecks. I don't know what would have happened if we would have run into them. I don't know if they were squatters, or if they owned the house, or what the hell was going on with them. But a few months later, we heard on the news that someone was shot and killed in that house. They never caught the guys who did it though, and ever since, I can't help but wonder what the fuck happened. We never got a good look at the people either. But I know that they knew we were there. We tried to come back for our bikes a few nights later, but they were gone, so they must have taken them. It's crazy to think that someone died in that house, literally murdered while we were there. That easily could have been us. If we would have been found in there, we would have been killed for being a witness, I'm sure of it. I, female 23, was recently in Africa on vacation with my family, and we stayed 2 nights at a desert camp in the Sahara. The first night, my sister and I were talking about hanging out with the guys who worked there, who were all probably around ages 20 to 35. Seemed like they were just very friendly and harmless. I noticed at the campfire that night that one of the guys started paying more attention to me, and I felt a little uncomfortable by it, but I figured it was just a language barrier or something. So out in the desert, you can see the stars really well, and even the Milky Way on clear nights. But you have to wait for the moon to go down, which is around 2 a.m. I guess it's a normal thing for the guys to come around to the tents, which are luxury tents, furnished with beds, lights, a toilet, and shower as well as a lock on the doors, so not normal camping. I guess it was normal for them to come and knock on the door to see if you were awake and want to come look at the stars. My sister and I were sharing a tent, and my parents were in a separate one across the walkway. The first night around midnight, I told my sister I was too tired to go out because I was falling asleep, so she left to look at the stars without me, and I didn't lock the door because I didn't want her to get locked out if I fell asleep. Fast forward about an hour, and I'm on my side asleep when I wake up suddenly to see a head peeking in from the tent door. I thought it was my sister, so I groggily asked her, "What the fuck are you doing?" Because it was just weird the way she was standing there. I start to wake up more, and I realize that it's this guy from the campfire, and his head was peeking in my room while I was asleep. Now I know it could have been a simple misunderstanding, but I felt totally violated with my privacy, especially because we were on their territory in the middle of the desert. Like, I'm not kidding, we had to take a 30-minute truck ride into the dunes. I was in fight or flight at that moment. He literally woke me up with a panic attack, and I started to feel extremely nervous and on edge. So I went to the door and I told him I was tired. He kept trying to get me to come out to the dunes with a blanket, but I just kept saying no and that I didn't feel good and that I was tired, which was true. At this moment, I don't know where my sister is, and I don't know where my family is. I'm disoriented, and all I know is that this man is standing in front of me, and was literally just watching me sleep. I don't know how long he was there for. It could have been a literal second, or it could have been 2 minutes. But either way, I was high-key horrified. I told him no again, and I said that I'd go look at the stars tomorrow night. He told me that he wouldn't be at the camp the next night, and that's why he wanted to go out tonight, but I wouldn't budge. Once he realized I wasn't going to come outside, he asked me if he could have my number, and I told him no, that I had a boyfriend. I don't actually have a boyfriend, but it seemed like the only way this man would respect my disinterest, by knowing there was another man in the picture. After I said that, he asked me for my first name, and I gave it to him because I thought it wouldn't do any harm. And then I said goodnight and locked the door this time. I went right to the bathroom and I had diarrhea. Not important, I just wanted to show that he scared the literal shit out of me. And while I was on the toilet, I heard him come back and start calling my name from outside the tent. But I just stayed quiet and I didn't say anything. I finished in the bathroom and I lied down in my bed, still trying to calm down from what had just happened because my heart was racing. I heard him come back again calling my name. I laid in bed still as I could and I didn't say anything. I tried texting my dad, but he wasn't answering, and I didn't feel comfortable leaving the tent. Finally, my sister came back and my dad was with her, so I told them what just happened, and they were confused, and they thought it was weird, and that was kind of it. The next day I brought it up at breakfast again, and my sister and dad basically told me I was being dramatic, and that I should just stop talking about it already, and that it wasn't that big of a deal. My mom was the only one who agreed with me that it was weird. The second night my sister and I were both out under the stars, talking to the guys and relaxing. Keep in mind, it's very dark and you can't see any faces, so I was having a normal convo with this one guy. I couldn't see him, but all was well. After a while, he asks me if I remember him, and I'm like, well, no, I can't see you. Oh, well, shine a light then, he said. So I do. And wouldn't you guess, it's the same dude from my tent as last night. I especially wasn't expecting him to be the dude in front of me because he had just told me he wouldn't be there that night, which leads me to believe he picked up a shift just to see me, but I can't be too sure. Either that or he was lying about not being there the next night in an attempt to get me out there with him. But surprisingly, he was fine that night and he respected my boundaries, so I didn't say anything to the guys who ran the camp. However, I was planning on doing so if he did anything remotely that made me uncomfortable, but he didn't. The next morning we left the area, and a few days later I started getting message requests on Instagram. Would you believe that this guy found me? I tagged the entire desert in the pics I posted. Like you're telling me he found me based on my name and a location. Not even a specific location, an entire desert. And my name isn't unique either. Anyway, he messages me, and although I'm creeped out, I'm also thinking, okay, well now he's harmless, I might as well see what he says. He says, direct quote, "You know, I'm really happy to find your account. I was looking for a long time." Which I found highly creepy to even say to someone. But again, it could just be a cultural difference, who knows. I didn't answer him, and he messaged me again a few days later saying, "Hey, how are you?" But I didn't answer. So yeah, I guess I'm just curious what you guys think about this, and if I was really overreacting, or if you think my literal gut feeling was right. He seemed to be harmless in the end, but you never know. This whole situation started when I was a teenager. I am now in my late 20s and I'm a woman. It was one small conversation that I had completely forgotten about until 2 years ago. But in the past 2-ish years, more things have happened that made me really think about that short conversation. I was about 13, and my mom and I had just moved back in with my grandma, where my uncle was already living. And at the time, his friend was living with us as well. He was only staying for a few months. I never knew why, I just knew he was staying there. One day, while the friend was out of the house, my uncle sat me down and told me he didn't want me to be alone with his friend, and that I needed to call him if I found myself alone with his friend. Only about a week after my mom and I moved in, my uncle kicked his friend out. I was young and I didn't think much about the conversation, and I had completely forgotten about it. About 2 years ago, my uncle very suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. And after he passed, his friend came back into my grandma's life. I think my grandma kind of used my uncle's friend as a replacement for my uncle. And at first, everything seemed fine. But after a few visits, I started feeling weird around him and I didn't know why. And I remembered that conversation my uncle had with me. But I tried to move past it because it was over 10 years ago that we had that conversation. And he is married to a lovely woman, so I thought maybe things had changed. He made a lot of dumb jokes that I never found funny, but were always harmless. Like, here's an example. Sometimes I would come home with a bowl of snacks in it because my coworkers and I shared our snacks with each other, and he would ask where his share was. Small stuff like that. But then sometimes he made jokes about what I was wearing that would make me feel a little uncomfortable. But I was used to my family making similar jokes, so I brushed it off. Things like, "Oh, who are you trying to impress going out like that?" And "You must be fighting off men left and right," and other similar comments. I started to avoid leaving my room at that point when he would come over, but sometimes interactions with him were unavoidable because he would be here when I was getting home from work, or he would come over without warning. Another bit of backstory. I'm engaged to a man who lives in a different country, and with all the times that I've gone to visit him, I have really fallen in love with where he lives. On top of that, it's more affordable and overall much safer for us to live there, so we are working on moving me there to be with him. Well, I don't tell my uncle's friend anything because he makes me uncomfortable, but I know my grandma shares everything with him, so he knows all about this situation. And he has on more than one occasion asked me why I was moving, and I would explain that it's because that's where my fiancé lives, and I absolutely love everything about where he lives. My uncle's friend will always come back with, "Oh, of course it's for a boy." And he has also made comments along the lines of, "Oh, I guess you're in love. I just don't understand it, but whatever." Like, he acts bothered that I'm engaged and moving away. But again, I would just hide myself away in my room and constantly convince myself that I was reading into things and overreacting. I also knew I couldn't say anything to my grandma about it because my family is one of those, like, if you don't want comments, you need to cover yourself up. And I'm not allowed to wear shorts around male family members because if they look at me and have bad thoughts, then it's my fault. Now, all of these small instances were very uncomfortable for me, but I just ignored them, hid in my room, did what I could to avoid the situations. But then, something happened today, and now I'm just feeling icky. I went into work, and my coworker told me how yesterday, a man fitting the description to a T, my uncle's friend, came into my work in the afternoon, after I had already left, asking about me. And he knew details like what I looked like, where I lived, even details about my move to another country, and he made comments about being my uncle's friend. Now, I didn't hear any of this, as I already had left for the day, but my coworker is a very trustworthy person, and doesn't just come up with this kind of stuff for fun. She'll even be the first one to call someone out on their BS if she catches them lying, so I trust what she's saying is true. But he was saying how ever since my uncle had passed, he has been trying to see me more and more because he just cares about me and sees me as his daughter. That comment alone weirded me out because I've barely interacted with this man, and I avoid it at all costs, so why does he feel that close to me? He also started talking at length about my move to another country, and he wouldn't leave the topic. Just kept talking about how he doesn't get how I could fall in love with someone so far away, and how I should just stay here and find someone here to fall in love with. He was making other comments basically about how he doesn't approve of my move to be with my fiancé. This man is weirdly obsessed with me. I never told him where I worked, but I know my grandma probably did. It still weirds me out that he came into my workplace looking for me, and then talking at length with my coworkers about my choices and my future, and how he doesn't like it when I barely know him. I just can't wait to get out of this house and move far away from him. so the story took place when I was 12. It is more than half my lifespan ago, but I still get really uneasy when thinking back to it. I tried to block it from my mind and not guess as to what could have happened if it wasn't for the two kind strangers that helped me. I was walking home from school one day. It was a 4-kilometer walk along a busy road. I was alone. However, at one of the intersections I crossed, there was a tall, dirty-looking man that noticed me. I would guess his age was early 30s, but being a kid back then, I struggled telling the age of adults. He started following me and trying to strike up a conversation. He kept telling me that I was beautiful and that he wanted us to be friends. He asked me where I lived and if my parents would be home. And he asked me many more questions, but I tried to shrug him off and be polite. I didn't really answer any of his questions. I just increased the pace at which I walked. When we were nearing the block on which I lived, I started becoming really uneasy. He was following me, and I obviously wanted him to leave me alone. He gave off a weird vibe, because adults didn't usually speak to me that way. The only way I could get rid of him would be to give him my cell phone number and agree to answer when he calls. Because the situation made me uncomfortable, I gave him a fake number and I hightailed it out of there. A few months passed without me running into that man again, so I completely put this out of my mind. He was probably just some weirdo. However, as you can guess from here, things did not stay that way. One day, approximately 4 months later, I found myself walking home after school again. I will admit that I wasn't paying much attention to my surroundings. That was until I heard what sounded like footsteps running up behind me. My reflexes quickly made me turn around to look, and it was that same creepy man that I had encountered before. He slowed his pace as he reached me, but he was yelling at me the entire time. He figured out that I had given him the wrong number and he was furious. He kept yelling and saying that I think I am better than him, and that was why I gave him a fake number. I was terrified at that moment as he was really angry. I was afraid that he was going to hurt me, but I couldn't grab the attention of any motorists. Speed walked to the closest petrol station, which was luckily not too far, with him following behind me, still yelling the entire time. When I got to the station, I immediately got the attention of 2 burly men standing next to their pickup truck. They must have seen the terrified look on my face, plus the man following me as they immediately ran over to ask if I was alright. I was too scared to speak. I just shook my head frantically as I tried to get behind them. They immediately demanded to know why the man was following me. He fed them some BS, and the man tried to lie and say he was my brother. I just silently kept shaking my head. I guess they figured out what was happening at this point as I started yelling at the man. They were accusing him of being a child predator. I didn't stay to find out what happened. I took the opportunity of him being distracted and I started to run away. The man noticed that I was leaving and he tried to take off after me, but the men really took offense to this as they immediately tackled him and threw him in the back of their pickup. He was screaming at this point. They sped off with the guy at an inconceivable speed right past me and just kept going. I was happy that they took him away, but I didn't stop running until I reached home. I had no idea what to make out of this entire exchange, but it really shook me. I really don't want to know where they took that creepy guy or what they did to him after. In all honesty, I didn't want to know. I told my parents and I altered the route I walked home from school. I never saw him again, and I'm thankful for that. Even though I could not say what I needed at that moment, those 2 kind strangers saw that I was in distress and dealt with it for me. Even after all these years, I still remember the sheer terror and then relief when they took him away. So I'm going to tell you the story of my brief encounter with a man called Happy. I'm sure it wasn't his real birth name, but it adds to the creepy ambience of the story. Even though it happened around 9 years ago, sometimes he still crosses my mind. Especially on gloomy overcast days in LA, just like the day I met Happy. It was 2013. I'm working at a cannabis dispensary in Venice Beach, a block from the boardwalk. A good 35% of our patrons were unhoused people, Occasionally someone experiencing severe psychosis would try to come in, but if they were screaming or unintelligible, security would not let them in. If they had and presented the holy trinity of medical papers, ID, and cash, they were good to go. We had a compassion program where we'd bag up grams of shake left over from the bottoms of jars and give them away completely free, one person per day, to anyone who asked. Word about this quickly spread on the boardwalk. Generally, these people would be the nicest, most polite, and considerate customers, even if they did smell a bit stinky and their money got pulled out of a sweaty sock. No one working there would ever bat an eye if someone came in smelling like they had just slept on the beach for a week next to a bottle of vodka, as long as they just calmly buy their weed and be on their way, like any other customer. It was a foggy and chilly day around the holidays, sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Someone called out of work, so I was the only person in the back, bud tending. There was another employee at the reception, and the security guard at the front door, but I was alone in the back room. There are cameras, but no one is actively watching them. This guy walked in after being checked in at the front, and he was the only customer at the moment. And I swear, the whole room gets a little colder as he walked in. He was wearing a very worn-in, deeply faded, wrinkled floor-length leather duster jacket like a cowboy. It looked like he lived and slept in these same clothes for years. We didn't really allow hats, hoods, or sunglasses in the store, so I'm surprised that the security didn't make him take his hat off. This man was like 6'5" and built like a boulder. Not really obese, but just large. Pick you up and toss you like a ragdoll type large. The stench that comes with him is unlike anything I've ever smelled before, though. It was beyond BO. Beyond piss or shit. It smelled like actual death. As if he had raw, rotting carcasses tucked under his thick, long leather coat. I thought I had been hardened by the plenty of nasty body stank before. But this was absolutely revolting and far beyond anyone who hadn't showered lately or pissed their pants. I'm trying not to inhale very deeply, and I say, "Hi, sir. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Would you mind taking off your hat? Just store policy," with a big customer service smile. "What are you looking for today?" He groans steeply and is walking very slow, shuffling and dragging his feet. His voice sounds like he gargles with gravel, rough and wet, raw and angry. "I don't take off my hat," he said. At this point, I'm not trying to argue with this man about his hat either. Let's just get him in and out. I glance down and see that he's not wearing shoes. The bit I can see from under his coat, one of his ankles is massively purple or blackish colored and swollen, like the size of a melon. The bottoms of both of his feet are bloody and torn up, and I realize he is leaving a slight trail of blood as he drags his ragged feet across the concrete floor of the shop. My first thought is, why and how the fuck did security let this guy come in? Second, is this guy is obviously injured, and that was concerning as a human being. I'm making sure to keep the display shelf between me and this guy, but that's only about a foot of space, kind of like a bar. He gets closer to me and the stench gets stronger. I meekly but sincerely ask, "Are you alright, sir?" His eyes then flared at me. "What do you care?" he said. And then in my head, I'm kind of like, well, I tried, not my life, not my problem. Not my monkeys, not my circus. "Great, so what can I get for you?" I asked. He then pulls up one of his sleeves to expose his forearm, and it was covered in a large amount of burns, like from a cigar. Some were old, some were healed, and some were fresh, pussy and infected. It wasn't track marks, it was clearly third-degree burns. He also had a jagged, homemade-looking stick-and-poke tattoo of a smiley face, the crooked circle, 2 lines for the eyes, and an eerily-looking smile. He pointed at this tattoo. "Happy. My name is Happy," he said. The rotting stink was so strong, and I needed to breathe, so I took little gasps, the least amount possible. "I walked here. I walked all the way from Pasadena." "Wow, sir, that's a very long walk. Anyway, what are you looking for today?" "Just for you," he said. His eyes are dark and menacing. He's smeared with a layer of grime like he lives in the woods. He doesn't look like the average crushed punk or disabled veteran that you would generally see living on the beach. It was hard to guess his age, but he wasn't that old or young, somewhere between 30 and 50. He looked like he dragged himself from his log cabin, like what would happen if you entangled some quantum mechanics poorly and mixed Ed Gein with an 1800s homesteader, then transported him to 2013 Venice Beach. I of course have never seen this man before, but once was more than enough to make him unforgettable. He kept staring at me, and I moved as far back as I can to the wall, hopefully out of his grasp if he lunged. I would need to walk out from behind the register and around to him to get to the security guard. I was weighing my options. I decided to grab a bunch of compassion grams, and then I weighed out an eighth, and I marked it down that I'd pay for it later. And he's still just leering at me, wheezing heavy breaths. We actually have a special today, only for people who walked more than 10 miles to get here. This is all for you, on the house. Thank you for stopping by. He accepted the bag, but continues to just stand there and stare at me. Thank you, Happy, I said. It actually worked. He grunted a guttural noise that was not a word, and slowly turns to shuffle back towards the door. At the door, he turns back towards me and says, "I'll see you later." He finally walked out after, leaving plenty of his residual stench of death behind. Thank any and all of the gods I did not see Happy later, or ever again. When I asked security why the F they let him in, he said that he had noticed his bloody feet, and said, "Hey bro, are you all good? It looks like it hurts." Apparently Happy stepped up in his face and threatened to choke him out, and called him a stupid N-word. And since it was just him and two 22-year-old, 130-pound girls, he wasn't trying to die, and hoped that Happy would just get his stuff and leave. He was watching the cameras in the back, ready to call the police and owners if anything got too weird. Apparently we had different definitions of weird, but I understood his reaction, and ultimately we were all fine, just spooked and creeped out. But now we were left with needing to clean blood off the floor with bleach and gloves, and texting our boss that he owed us free weed. He actually agreed, and we all lived happily ever after. About 10 years ago, a few of my buddies and I went on a short-lived camping and fishing trip in a pretty remote lake a few hours from our small town. We were all packed and ready to go. The trip there was pretty quiet until we started to get pretty close to our destination. As we got closer, I think we all started to get a little excited, and some of us had that excitement adrenaline rolling through us. When we got there, we set up camp. Nothing too crazy. We only had 2 tents between the 4 of us and our own backpacks with what we needed for the weekend. After getting settled in, we grabbed all of our fishing gear, a shit ton of beer, and headed off to the lake to try our luck with fishing. It was probably around 3 p.m. We were all having a blast. Some of us may have been a little bit more drunk than we should have been, but that was all part of the fun. Just men being men. After a number of hours rolled by, we were all ready to call fishing a day. It was around 8 o'clock and dusk was approaching, so we started heading back to camp. We were quite a ways from camp still, and we didn't realize how far we went. We knew we were a ways out, but I think we all sort of lost track of how far we really went. It was no big deal though. The sunset was beautiful, and we were approaching camp just in time for nightfall. When Jimmy and Tom were getting out of their boat, we noticed some flashing lights up ahead through the woods past camp. When they disappeared after a few seconds, we figured they were just passersby, so it only shortly lived in our minds. "Holy crap, guys, look," Tom said. We all looked in the direction he was pointing in, and there was a freaking bear. No more than 50 feet away from where John and Timmy were standing. "Yo, just stay calm, dude, and he will leave us alone." We all quietly walked back to camp relatively slowly because we didn't want to set off the bear into thinking we were prey. Luckily, we all made it safely to camp. Just as soon as we thought all of our problems were gone, we heard a car in the distance. It was rolling in closer now, and we started to see the headlights. Then a few moments after that, the car rolled up on us at camp. It was an all blacked out SUV. I gulped in fear as I've heard horror stories of people being attacked in the woods just out of the blue, and unfortunately, that's what my mind went to, fight or flight. I felt a slight panic inside as the two men stepped out of the vehicle. They both had to be over 6'1" or 6'2", and they were both jacked as hell. They introduced themselves as sheriffs, and they asked us what we were doing out here. Tom said we were camping, and that's when I blurted out to leave us alone. I had a fishy feeling about what was going on. We could barely see them in the darkness as they were shining their dumb flashlights at us. They said they saw us fishing and demanded to see our fishing licenses, which we all had, so it wasn't really a problem. I didn't want to give mine up, though, because I started to wonder if they were even real cops. Plus, we didn't do anything for them to suspect that either of us committed a crime, and I verbally let them know that I knew my rights as a US citizen. One of them demanded I give them my ID, and they threatened to arrest me if I didn't give it up. I wasn't letting him scare me, though. My dad is a cop, and I know it's not normal for them to abuse their power like this. My father always told me what to do in a situation like this. I told them my father was the chief of police for the county, and I asked them what county they worked for, but they didn't answer my question, of course. And yeah, I did lie a little, but I was hoping to build some street cred for our group. My dad wasn't the chief of this county specifically, but the next county over. After I told them that, though, we could all tell that they were starting to get choked up, and they started pretending like there wasn't an issue any longer. "Sorry for bothering you guys," one of them said. Then they walked away and got back in their car. As they were walking back to the SUV, we noticed they weren't wearing a traditional police uniform. They were just wearing normal flannels and sweatpants. Maybe we should have chased them down or called the police, but we never did. We were all sure that they were fake police. When I got home, I told my dad about it, and he never alerted the station because none of us could give enough detail about the men. Can't help but wonder what their plans were, whether or not they were real cops or not. If they weren't, were they going to try and search us and disarm us of all of our weapons, then attack us and rob us? If they were real cops, were they just on a power trip? Who knows, but I'm glad nothing worse came of this situation. I've hesitated to share this story for a long time, because I know how important the mutual trust between a resident and their landlord or maintenance staff is. And I don't want to instill any unnecessary distrust in anyone's landlord. I've shared stories before about dangerous and scary residents that I've encountered while working at apartment complexes, but this is a story about my time on the other side of things as a renter. Before I had even graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to live at Paradise Apartments. I was a bit naive at the time, drawn in by the many amenities that I would never use, but I primarily wanted to live there because the complex was pet-friendly and within my small budget. When the time eventually came for me to get my own place, I got the only apartment they had available and I moved in. Unfortunately, I came to realize the apartment wasn't as nice as I had originally thought. The building was old but remodeled, so it had all the typical plumbing issues and thin walls. I also learned it was not the safest part of town. I was primarily an online student, but I had one class that met in person twice a week around 8 a.m. I am a bit of a homebody, so I rarely left during the day, except for that class, the occasional shopping trip, or to spend time with my boyfriend in the evening after he got off work. My apartment was a bit of a Bermuda Triangle. Even though it was only 600 square feet and I lived alone, things had a way of growing legs and walking away. I had 2 kittens at the time, and I blamed them often for things disappearing. Something odd that kept recurring, however, was that I'd find my underwear box out and sitting in the center of my bedroom floor on days when I had class. I didn't have a proper dresser. Instead, I was using an IKEA shelf with some IKEA boxes for designated clothes, like socks, underwear, pants, and pajamas. I always could have sworn I'd put the underwear box right away after getting ready for class, but I chalked it up to me forgetting as a result of having to get up early and being focused on getting to class on time. Arguably paranoid, I started to think that some of my laundry was disappearing as well. His favorite articles of clothing would go into the laundry hamper and seemingly never come back with the clean clothes. Towards the end of that semester, I was working one evening on a homework assignment when but my boyfriend called to let me know his roommate had accidentally locked him out of their apartment. I had a key to their place, so he asked if I could run over real quick to let him in. Before I left, I made a mental note that I had literally left every single light in my apartment on. Because I was living on a pretty tight budget, I normally made a point of turning off all the lights when I left. But my boyfriend only lived about 5 minutes away, so I knew I'd be there and back very quickly. Sure enough, I got back less than 15 minutes later. I immediately sensed something was off, as I could see the lights were off all through the blinds. I called my boyfriend and he drove over to meet me. We unlocked the door and went in. All the lights were off in my apartment. Thinking maybe I had a power outage, I flipped on the main light and it came on. My boyfriend checked the entire apartment, but no one was inside. But someone had gone through and systematically turned off every light at their switch, including my lizard's basking light, the only light that I always left on because it was on a timer, and my laptop, which I left open on my assignment, but now the computer had been powered down and closed. Called the emergency maintenance number and I explained that someone had been inside my apartment and that they had to have used a key because there was no sign of forced entry. The manager called me back and told me I had to be imagining things. Maybe I had forgotten that I turned off the lights before I left. I assured him that I wouldn't have turned off the computer or the lizard light, and that someone had been in my apartment. I told him I was really worried because obviously this person had a key to get in. Either they worked for the complex, or maybe it was a previous tenant. I asked if they had changed the locks after the previous tenant moved out, and they assured me that they changed the locks after every move out. The manager suggested that maybe it was a friend pranking me, or someone else I had given a key to. The only other people I'd given keys to were my boyfriend and my mom, but she lived 3 hours away. In any case, neither of them would have pranked me in this way. The manager finally agreed to send someone out immediately to change the lock for my peace of mind. I brought up my concern that it was someone on the staff, since they would be the only other people with keys. The manager claimed the keys were locked in a special safe that required a personalized code to track who took what keys, when, and where, and that they had them in an office with a security camera. They changed my locks, but I had my doubts that it would do much good. As far as I was aware, there were only 2 maintenance men that worked at the complex. One nice older man that didn't seem all that skilled, and a younger guy with a scruffy beard that gave me a bad feeling. I suspected that he had to be the one that had been breaking in. When I had first moved in, the manager had told me I would be getting a new kitchen counter within the first 3 days. I waited to move my kitchen stuff, but after a week they hadn't come, and then after a few months I had completely forgotten about it. One day, I was sitting in my living room and this scruffy maintenance guy walked in without knocking or announcing himself, and I hadn't received a notice to expect him. He said he was there to replace my countertop, but it took him 2 days to install one small piece of counter. A few weeks later, I was getting out of the shower and I heard a single knock at the door. I called out, "Just 1 minute," and I hurried to get some clothes. Not even 2 seconds later, the door started to open. I had to slam it shut because I was still wrapped in a towel to stop him from coming in. He claimed he hadn't heard me call out, but I had my doubts. I don't remember what excuse he had for coming in. Another time I found a note from him that he had come in again, and it didn't give me a reason as to why, but that he made sure not to let my cats out. He also made a note about my third cat being cute, except I didn't have a third cat. I did, however, have a picture of my childhood cat in my bedroom on the IKEA shelf where I kept my clothes. At that point, I went to the office to ask them to make a note in my file that I A. wanted at least 24 hours notice before entry, and B. wanted to always be present for future entry. Now that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that someone was coming in secretly, it all made sense. It hadn't been long after the surprise maintenance visit stopped that things had started moving around in my apartment. He was also on site, all the time. Everyone on staff also lived at Paradise, so he knew when I came and went. We knew how many times he had snuck in, how many small souvenirs he had stolen. Could have been coming in while I was asleep even. After the night with the lights, I put my own lock on the door, but I still didn't totally trust the apartment. I ended up buying a condo shortly after, with help from my parents. I subleased the apartment and moved. Right around that time, I also got my first job working in a different apartment complex. The final days before I left, my mom came into town to help me move my stuff. While she was home alone, I was at a class. She caught the scruffy maintenance man trying to get his key to work in my lock. She demanded to know what he was doing, and he said he was there to paint the front door. I hadn't received a notice though, and he didn't have any paint or supplies. She told him he could wait until after I moved out. A few years later, I was stopped by the owner of Paradise Apartments while working at another complex in town called OK Apartments. So basically, shopping is when an employee from another apartment complex takes a tour at another apartment complex under the guise of wanting an apartment for the purpose of gaining information that they might not otherwise easily give up. It can also be performed by your own management company to make sure that you're doing a good job. There were certain tells a shopper always gave, like asking specifically worded questions. Is it safe here? I'm a felon, can I live here? You know, ones that required specifically worded answers and were easy to trip up on. Being too wealthy for the complex, Rolex watch, sports car, nice suit, etc., and being too flexible on what they were interested in. They were interested in all the layouts, and they were open to move in whenever. This guy seemed too old and too well off to be randomly considering an apartment at OK, as we were geared towards lower income folks. While I was giving the tour, he asked if I had any opinions on other apartment complexes in town, and mentioned Paradise specifically. Normally I wouldn't badmouth any other complexes. I preferred to win them over by showing them the positives of our community, but I told him that I probably wasn't the best person to answer that question, because I was probably the only person to give Paradise a bad review in the last 5 years. He asked me to elaborate, and I told him my apartment had been broken into, and I suspected it was someone on their maintenance staff. At that point, he revealed that he was the owner of Paradise, and that he was very disturbed to hear I had this experience. He asked me to describe the maintenance man in detail. I assured him it was in the past and that I was over it, but he insisted on calling the manager over at Paradise, which was still the same guy, to ask him over speakerphone if they had any issues with the maintenance staff back in the year I lived there. He answered yes, that there had been a scruffy young maintenance man he had to fire, because he had been caught multiple times breaking into the apartments of single women. Satisfied now, the owner probably told me that the issue had been resolved and asked if I would be willing to change my review. I told him no, that none of this had changed the fact that I experienced this, but I was happy he was actually able to validate what I had suspected. In the years I worked as a leasing agent, I learned a lot about where complexes will cut corners to save time and money. From my experience, a lot of complexes did not switch out the locks if the tenant was good, and a lot did not require background checks for employees, even though they did require them from tenants. Keys also got passed out willy-nilly to vendors and maintenance during turns, and employees frequently got master keys that would open all the doors. I won't go so as far to say every complex operates this way, but every complex I worked at was doing this when I started there. Because of my own experiences, once I began managing a complex, I enforced strict rules about changing locks, tracking keys, posting proper notices, and requiring background checks for all employees and tenants. At least here in Florida, with me as law going into effect this year, background checks for employees and security measures for keys are required for all complexes. Even still, if you're renting an apartment, stay diligent. If you have a reason to believe someone is coming into your home, you should document it and let the staff or police or your friends and family know. You never know who might have a key to your apartment. In 2008, I was in the market for buying a new truck. I went to a few dealerships, but only found a few that merely caught my eye. I was in no rush to get a new one. I just wanted to make sure I was going to be happy with the one that I was getting. That was what was most important to me. I found a 2005 F-150 on Craigslist for a decent price. It had low miles on it as well. The only thing that needed to be replaced were some tires, which was kind of a hassle, but I was still interested. I figured I could talk him down on the price for the inconvenience of it. He gave me the supposed address of where he and the truck was located. And when I showed up, I was met with a nice older gentleman, probably late 50s, early 60s. He seemed like an alright man, or a normal guy. He He was very straight to the point and he didn't have much to say. I asked him for a slight discount on the truck considering the tires, and he seemed reluctant at first, but we came to an agreement. My fiancée rode with me to look at the truck in case I were to end up buying it. That way she could drive the other vehicle home and I would drive the new truck. Well, that's what ended up happening. After a quick test drive, I decided I wanted it, so I gave him the cash and we were on our merry way. I was excited about it and that I got a new truck for such a killer deal. We went home and we went on about our day. It wasn't until later that night when I stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, I saw a shadow of what looked like to have been a man standing in my driveway. Now I have a long driveway and we live in the country. It was really dark and all I could see was the shadow of him. It was pitch black. I guess I didn't even know if it was a man or a woman, but from the build of the person I assumed it was a man. I called out to him asking who he was, but he didn't answer. I threatened to call the police if he didn't walk away, and after that he started walking towards me. I ran inside quickly and I told my wife to call the police and to let them know that there was an unknown man in our driveway. I ran into our room and grabbed my rifle and walked back outside to try and scare him off, but he was gone. I was hoping he got the memo. Right then I chuckled to myself as I thought I scared him off, but I was completely wrong. Because in an instant, I heard my wife screaming for my help inside. I ran as fast as I could to her, and I saw that the man had her pinned to the ground. I ran over to them and I hit him with the butt of my rifle and I knocked him out cold. Apparently we left the garage door unlocked and that's how he let himself into our house. Put a zip tie around his wrists and I put them behind his back in case he were to wake up and try to run off. We waited for the police to show up and I wasn't sure if he was even alive at one point, so I checked his pulse. His heart was still beating, so I was kinda glad I didn't murder him. The cops showed up and arrested the man, but not before taking him to the hospital. My wife and I were taken in for questioning, but ever since then, I've been an over-the-top, on-edge, paranoid kind of person. I genuinely think I developed some sort of PTSD from this shit. I learned that he placed some GPS tracker under our truck before selling it to us, and that's how he found us. Why? I'm not sure. The whole thing is extremely strange, and my wife and I still think about it from time to time. We don't have a clue what he had against us or why he would want to do such a thing to us at all. And the police never got a good answer from the man on why he did it. It's clear there was something mentally wrong with him, but still, what compels a man to be violent like that for no reason? He's honestly lucky he walked out of my house alive after grabbing my wife like that, just saying. So for a quick backstory, I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. To be honest, after a while I wasn't even scared anymore since he almost never came close to me. And I know being stalked can affect people severely, even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I got lucky and I was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts, such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to catch or identify him. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered, maybe it would make him angry, or maybe he'd be turned on. Don't know, don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he definitely didn't like it. Like I said, he was never usually aggressive, and he never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of me by myself unlocking my apartment door. I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he was physically there, but I don't know for sure. I don't know how he got wind of the AMA, but he did. The next week was quiet. No letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the post. He also left me a long hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue that I had posted on the German version of r/am I the asshole. His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment, but I opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was also taped shut. As I'm typing this out, I realized that it wasn't a good idea at all to open it, and it could have ended badly for me. But luckily he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, nothing you could use to restrain someone, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones. Not actually used, just made to look like that, according to police. And a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago, and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumpled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and I gave it to them. They were more concerned this time finally. They told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago it started again. Found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, and how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago, I left my apartment in the morning and I heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it at night. I went off to work in a hurry because I was in a hurry, and I was just going to make my boyfriend call the police. But then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, lights smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on it. The phrase read, "It's time soon, miss," with my first and last name. I went back inside and I called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just pissed at this point, which I made very clear. If for some reason you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, gifts, photos, even the damn glass under my doormat, are just really annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless to me now, and that threat scared me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police took the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't high of quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said it wasn't enough. They told me they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days. Until 2 days ago, someone rang the doorbell just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant. I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up, I heard them shouting, "This is the police, open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors who came home from his night shift about an hour earlier and heard someone else enter the building after them before their door was fully shut. My neighbors know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building before. This neighbor then went into his apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on, and they did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 a.m. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. You should have been able to see the cop car since there's a little window up there, and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or he wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him, and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. For now, at least. He's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now I finally got some peace. For some context, I'm a 32-year-old female. This happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I work full-time as a researcher at a university, which is where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor or anything, and because of my age at the time, I could have easily been mistaken for just another student wandering around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I would prefer to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds outside or sitting underneath a shady tree on a bench, enjoying the time I was not sitting in a cramped corner of a lab. On one of these days, I was sitting on a bench enjoying the fresh air, and a male student walking by asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward kind of person, so even though I would really have preferred sitting alone, I said sure. He initiated simple conversation, to which I obliged, but being careful not to be too forthcoming. He mentioned he had seen which department building I came and went from, which slightly alarmed me given I had never seen this person before in my life. But I pushed the thought from my mind. After all, the weather had been decent lately and I had spent nearly all my lunch hours for the past week outside. He asked if I was studying within the mentioned department, to which I told him that I was not a student, but rather I worked here. He told me he was an engineering student, and then he followed up with asking me out to coffee sometime. I apologized and I told him that I had a boyfriend and that I would have to decline. We parted ways after that, and I assumed I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or two went by, and I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench somewhere. Seemingly out of nowhere, the same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. I don't remember what he started talking to me about at first. My mind was reeling, and I was rather uncomfortable having to potentially turn this guy down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me again if we could go out for coffee sometime. I apologized and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and that I would not be meeting him for coffee. And again, he left after that. I was feeling rather anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt like I had to be too concerned. A few days later, I had finished work and I was leaving the building to walk to where I had parked my car. The university charges a fortune for parking passes, even if you're employed by them, so I had always opted for free street parking about a 10-minute walk away from campus. My walking route would take me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car traffic. Even pedestrian traffic was pretty sparse on the busiest of days. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I noticed him from my peripheral vision, and I didn't want to flat out turn around to stare at him. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to see someone else by any means. I was just always trying to be aware of my surroundings when walking the streets alone. I had to make a few turns coming up anyways, and the chance that they would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made all the turns that I did, still walking on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. I still did not want to look at whoever it was. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of what I thought he was doing. I quickened my pace to a speedy walk. I was approaching the first of the two busier streets before I would reach my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me. That was the moment I panicked. The moment I was sure that he was indeed following me. After that, I started a full-out jog to cross the first street of the busier streets. He ran to keep up behind me, and was now on the same side of the street that I was. I was now nearly at my car, but I had to cross the last busy street and get about 100 meters, and then I would be there. But it was crossing the street that worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before it was clear enough to do so. If this were the case, he would catch up with me. As if the stars aligned, as soon as I made it running to the busy street, I had a gap to cross. I booked it as fast as I could, finally turning around once I had made it, to look and yell at the man who had been pursuing me. It was him. I could have suspected, but now it was confirmed. It was the engineering student from who I had turned down for coffee. "Stop following me," I yelled at him across from the busy street. "Can I just talk to you?" he yelled back. I didn't even answer him. The answer should have been obvious from the start, and I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed me and then chased me for about a kilometer. I kept moving quickly to my car, so determined to get the hell out of there that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. He had given up following me and never tried to cross the road too, to my relief. I got home and I broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I was not harmed fortunately, but I was shook. I had some anxieties walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I would walk most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I even changed where I started parking for a time. A few weeks had passed since the incident, and I had not seen him around campus at all. I had started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally I would go to the student center to buy lunch instead. This one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall, and I heard a guy trying to get someone's attention through the crowd. I look up and it's him again, waving to me and trying to make his way through the people. I panicked, and even though I'm terribly shy, I started a scene and I yelled to him to leave me the fuck alone. His face dropped instantly as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, I was even more focused on my surroundings than I ever was before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then, and I still work at the university. I'm so relieved to say I never saw him again after the food court, and I haven't had any other harrowing accounts on campus. I'm so diligent about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked this guy his name, so I couldn't even report an incident to the campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before or after me. Even though this happened back in December 2019, I still think about it on a daily basis because it was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. In early December, I had ventured out to do a bit of late night shopping. I'm a 31-year-old stay-at-home mother of 2 young children, so once my husband gets home from work, I like to take some time to myself and go shopping. Take a drive or run errands, kid-free. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I arrived at the Target I frequent. I'm by no means a paranoid or anxious individual, but I have attended several seminars in college on human trafficking, and I have done plenty of research on my own learning to identify red flags and what precautions to take when I'm out in public alone, especially at night. I carry several self-defense items on my person at all times, just in case. I parked directly in front of the store, next to a cart caddy, and I took a mental note of the vehicles parked nearby again, just as precautions. I was taught at an early age to always be observant of your surroundings, and being a control freak just naturally makes you that way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary that night, and the parking lot was actually quite empty, most likely because it was a weekday. As I entered the store, I began browsing like usual, following the natural flow of the store departments, following the main aisle around. I had been browsing for only 10 to 15 minutes when I noticed a young gentleman, mid-20s. He was tall, skinny, and dressed in a dirty gray two-piece sweatsuit and brown work boots. He looked over at me, so I smiled and said hello, but his facial expression was blank. He looked like he may have been high on something by the look in his eyes, but he didn't seem to care for my gesture, and he quickly moved on. At first glance, there was nothing in particular that alarmed me about him, except I took fact at the notice that he was wandering down the main aisle with no cart or basket, with his hands in his pockets, and didn't seem to be with anyone. I continued shopping with no second thoughts, and I made my way to the next apartment. Several minutes had passed, and that's when I noticed a second young gentleman, wearing the same type of clothing and similar pair of work boots. Again, no cart, no basket. He too glanced at me, then quickly darted his eyes away when he realized I was looking directly at him. I became a bit more alerted, but still remained composed and continued on browsing. Another 15 minutes or so passed, and that's when a third older man caught my attention. And you guessed it, same gray sweatsuit and work boots with no cart, no basket, just his hands in his pockets. I assumed they were in some sort of work uniform, maybe construction workers. But why weren't they walking around together, and why didn't they have any items to purchase? At this point, it was difficult to focus on browsing. I had a bad feeling about these men, and it became clear that something was a bit off. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I felt as if I was being monitored by the three of them, as if they were all communicating my whereabouts as I continued to make my way through the store, because each department I entered, it didn't take long for me to notice one of the three men pass by whatever side aisle I happened to be in, making their presence known to me. I stayed completely vigilant while trying not to panic or allow my suspicions to overwhelm me. Something about their presence felt very heavy and dark, so I decided to test their intentions, to prove I wasn't overthinking the situation and my bad gut feeling was valid. I began picking random aisles and traveling back and forth between departments in a very unorganized and random fashion to see if the men would continue to pass by me as frequently as they had been. With every aisle I popped into, it was just a few minutes later that one of them would make an appearance, staring me down as they passed by. It felt as I was being surrounded like a wild animal, hunted even. They were no longer trying to be conspicuous, which was the scariest part of it all, and everything instinctual was screaming at me to get out of there. I gripped my cart so tightly and figured if they got too close, I could use the cart to push them away, or at least create distance between us. By this point, I had been shopping for about an hour altogether, maybe a bit over that, and I was ready to purchase my items. But honestly, I felt too uncomfortable to continue browsing even if I wanted to. The men had been following me all that time, and I was becoming more annoyed if anything. The store was also pretty empty around this time, which is one of the main reasons I like shopping at night, but that made this particular situation even more unsettling. There were two pre-teen girls that were wandering around by themselves, which quickly caught my attention, because the men had bypassed them, making similar advances. But the girls were seemingly oblivious, so I quietly got their attention and asked them to go find their parents and stay with them, trying to not freak them out. That was just the mother in me that was in full protection mode. I couldn't imagine having my young children with me on this night. Thank God they were home safe and sound. As I made my way to the checkout, I noticed one of the men coming up from behind me, walking at a quicker pace this time, so I immediately stopped and turned to lock eyes with him as he approached me. I will never forget the darkness in his eyes. An eerie smirk formed on his face as he nudged my shoulder, continuing to stare me down, walking backwards to hold his sinister gaze as he exited out of the store. I had lost sight of the other two men, and I hated the uncertainty of it all. He made his message very clear in that moment. My stomach dropped and my entire body began to shake. It was a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a kid getting lost in the supermarket. A feeling of desperation. I quickly walked to the checkout, discreetly asked the cashier if I could speak to a manager, and I told him what transpired over the last hour, politely asking for a male employee to walk me out to my car and for them to alert their security team member. When I told the manager what happened, her face sunk as if she already known about these men, and once I described them, she confirmed she knew who I was talking about. She expressed to me that several of the female employees had found the men unsettling in the past, and reassured me that someone would escort me to my car. She made a report about the incident and said that she would alert the authorities. I was still shaking, but I felt relieved that she believed me and showed concern for the other young female workers in the store. She took my information, then a young male employee walked me out to my car. What I saw as I exited the store made me so sick to my stomach, solidifying all of my suspicions. There was a white windowless van that was parked in the lot directly behind my car, about a 3 parking space distance between mine. One of the men was seated in the driver's seat, and the other 2 were leaning against the side of the van, facing my car, attempting to hide out of view. I mean, how cliche and obvious can you be? Your license plate might as well read Lady Snatchers at that point. Whatever their intent, it didn't seem pure. I pointed them out to the male employee and said, "There they are," which then prompted the men to scurry into the van and speed out of the parking lot without hesitation. I truly don't know what would have happened if I would have walked out to my car alone, and I'm so freaking grateful I made it home safe and sound and lived to tell my story. Over the following week, I had heard that there were several abduction attempts in the shopping center parallel to that target, and I'm almost certain it was the same individuals. When I was 20 years old, about 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the guy who delivered for the night shift ended up getting fired due to him losing his license because of a DUI, I was placed on the night shift since my boss hired a family friend who could only work my shift for whatever reason. I really didn't want this shift because you never know if people who order late at night actually want a pizza or if they have other intentions in mind. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and essentially told me if I wasn't willing to work the night shift, I was fired. I wasn't exactly in a position where I could be out of work, so I reluctantly worked the shift. The first month of this shift went by without any issues until I had to deliver a pizza to a house that just barely made our delivery radius. I punched it in on my GPS and the house was located in a pretty suburban part of the city. I arrive and it's about 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, but decently lit and mostly littered with modern townhouses. But the house I delivered to was a duplex. I ring the doorbell and I wait for about 30 seconds. No answer. I ring it again and wait another 30 seconds. Still no answer. So now I'm standing there getting pretty nervous that something might go down. But thankfully a man opens the door. He looked like he was in his late 40s and he was pretty tall compared to me. Maybe a little over 6 foot. But he was very skinny. I tell him that his pizza is here and he just stands there staring at me. I asked him if he was okay and he responded by saying, "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I got off work not too long ago and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I suppose. He hands me the money and I hand him the pizza. And as I'm counting the change, he says, "You are really beautiful, you know that?" Not really thinking too much into it, I thanked him for the compliment and I gave him his change. I said goodnight and he did too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I get a delivery order to the same place. I head over there around the same time as last time and ring the doorbell. He answers the door again very excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and can't wait to go home, to which he chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well," as he was pulling out his wallet. As he was counting his money, he asks me what my name is. Being kind of tired at this point and not really thinking straight, I stupidly tell him my name. As I'm giving him his change again, he asks if he could have my number, as he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I am. Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. I've literally only met this guy like twice to deliver a pizza. I had no idea who this guy was, and I'm positive he barely knew who I was as well. Another thing to mention is that I looked way younger than I was at the time. I was told by numerous people that I still looked like I was 15, and I was hoping he thought differently and wasn't hitting on what he thought was a teenager. So now I'm just standing there awkwardly for a few seconds before I muster out, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He gets upset and says, "Oh, okay, I see." We stand there in silence before I tell him to have a good night and I walk back to my car. He says nothing and still stands at the doorway, staring at me until he finally went back inside once I started my car. I got a pretty creepy vibe from this guy, and I even brought it up to my coworkers, and they agreed it was pretty creepy. Except for my boss, who overheard everything and claimed I was making up stories and trying to gain sympathy for having to take the night shift. A week later, as I'm working the night shift and we get an order for the same guy again, and this is when shit finally hits the fan. I arrive at the house around 10:30 p.m. and keep in mind that from my perspective on the road, it didn't look like a single light in that house was on. I get out of my car and I walk to the front door with the pizza box in my arms. As I'm approaching the door, it quickly swings open to reveal the man, except this time he was wearing a suit, and I jumped back. He laughs and said, "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I would just open the door now so you wouldn't have to knock." I was getting scared because, as I mentioned before, there were no lights on in the house. So was he sitting in the dark this whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laugh and say it's okay. He asked me if I liked his suit, which I said yes. He then asks me, "Would you like to go on a date with me tonight?" What the hell? I once again tell him I have a boyfriend, to which he chuckles, gets close to me and says, "Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl." He then grabs a pizza box from me and throws it to the side and grabs me by my arms, hard. I'm officially shitting bricks at this point and trying not to cry from the fear that was overwhelming me. I start pleading with him. "Hey dude, please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight." He just stares at me with the most sinister look I've seen on someone's face and says, "I don't care. Get inside now. We're gonna have a good time." He starts trying to pull me into the house, and I'm trying to resist as hard as I can. After a bit of struggling, he lets go of one of my arms and starts grabbing something out of his pocket, which I presumed was a knife. That's when I did something that, to this day, I'm still thankful worked as he was doing that. I used my free arm to punch him as hard as I could in his stomach, which in turn stunned him for a few seconds, and he loosened his grip on me, allowing me to break free. I quickly run to my car, and as I get in, he runs at me and tries pulling me out of the car, holding the knife in the other arm, and even yells, "Why are you making this so difficult?" I grab a half-empty soda bottle I had in the cup holder, and I throw it, and luckily it hits his head and he lets me go. I slam the door, and then all of a sudden, he jumps right on the hood of my car and starts scratching and banging on my windshield with his knife. I put the car in reverse and quickly back out of the spot, and quickly reverse down the road with him desperately trying to hold on. He's literally banging on my hood, screaming, "Stop the car." I turn onto the next road as swiftly as possible, and luckily he falls off the hood of my car. I slammed the gas as hard as I could to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panicked state, I drove a couple blocks down the street and kept making turn after turn onto other side blocks as I feared I was being followed. Eventually, I reached a red light and I slammed on the brakes and just sat on the intersection frozen from what had just happened. I began crying and violently shaking as I was sitting there. It dawned on me that I came so close to losing my life, and I couldn't help but feel like I shouldn't have been alive. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side and I just continued crying. Eventually, I get the energy to drive back to the pizzeria, and almost immediately after I walk in, my coworker knew something was wrong after seeing me. I practically broke down in front of him, and everyone else came to the front wondering what was going on. I fought my tears and explained everything that had just happened as calmly as possible. My coworker comforted me, and my boss surprised me and began apologizing profusely for what had happened and for putting me on the night shift. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the police. They arrived at the store and I gave them my statement, as well as taking pictures of any marks on myself as well as the scratches on my car from the encounter as evidence. My coworker followed behind me as I drove home, and I collapsed on my bed, and strangely enough, I managed to fall asleep. I was just that tired. I quit my job the next day, and luckily a friend of mine managed to hook me up with a new job at her clothing store. As far as that psycho goes, 2 days later I receive an update from the police. The entire duplex was owned by the guy's brother, who lived on the right side with his wife, and the psycho lived on the left side of the duplex. I learned that he had been in and out of jail constantly at first, for robberies and assaults, but later on it was for sex crimes. He had been released from jail about 5 months before this encounter for having sex with a minor. When they arrived at the house, he was long gone and his family had no idea where he ran off to, but the police insisted they would find him. And indeed they did, but not alive. I spent the next 2 months in fear that he would find me and finish what he had in mind, but the police contacted me and updated me on the case. Apparently he fled to another city nearby and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone late at night on the street. Luckily somebody happened to be looking out the window at the right time and called the cops, and the police caught him trying to force her into his car. He manages to flee and the police chase after him. He blew a red light near a busy boulevard and a van slammed right into the driver's side of his car. By some sort of miracle, the driver of the van only sustained minor injuries while the psycho succumbed to his wounds long before the ambulance even arrived. I thank the officers for everything they did and for informing me, and I walked out of the station. I walked down the street and I lit up a cigarette as I'm taking in everything I had just been told. I don't usually wish death on anyone, but after hearing about his death, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I was just relieved that I would never have to encounter him again and that I wouldn't have to go through with charging him and reliving what happened that night. Who knows where I'd be if he managed to pull me into his house. I was 21 and recently became a police officer, and I was also recently dumped. So my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and a new cop, I had the I'm invincible and I can take on anyone mentality. I know that's toxic, but just bear with me for the story. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at the stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came. I was excited and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then the van started driving towards us, and it pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and I walked up. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what was going on and if he could back up his car a little bit. He was actually very polite and said he was the owner of the property and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me that he had been having trouble with poachers and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to look at some stars and wildlife, and he seemed perfectly okay with that and told me to have a nice date and drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car and I moved it to a more defensive position. It was the same man. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was screwed. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground, and neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me that they had a gun and to give them my money and truck and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and saying they didn't want to hurt me. He then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told him I was a cop. I drew my concealed firearm and to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was about to call 911 and tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field. While on the phone, they both fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after this man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and I heard 3 loud pops and saw a muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area that I picked her up in, and I called dispatch again and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut up and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale, looking horrified. I went to the back of the van, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front passenger seat, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen and the van was reported stolen. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again, ever. There was a girl at school named Amy who didn't have many friends. She was very quiet and honestly I thought she was a bit strange, but I also felt like it would be nice to befriend her. We got to talking and she actually turned out to be really nice and we became best friends rather quickly. It got to the point where I spent every weekend at her house and then we would walk to school together. Even at my age, I knew there was something weird about her dad, Kevin. He was very interested in me and always tried to play fight with me and stuff, which is kind of weird in itself. Whenever he was around, I felt weird. He was a short, fat man with gray and white hair. Always had a weird smirk on his face and really wide eyes. He started off with stealing bits of my food when I wasn't looking, and then laughing, and making sure to put his arms around my shoulders to apologize. He'd always be wherever we were, whether that be upstairs, downstairs, or outside. He always lurked about. There was a day Amy's nan was visiting, which is Amy's mother's mom. And Kevin kissed her nan on the mouth, hello, which was freaking weird. But then it turned into the creepiest, sloppiest French kiss. Everyone except me and Amy found it funny. She put on a smile when her family looked over, but I was horrified. Maybe I shouldn't have gone back, but I felt like I had to, for Amy. After that, there was a day we were playing in her room, and Kevin came in and started an argument over nothing. It got heated, and he grabbed rubbish bags, saying he was going to throw all of her toys away. Of course, an 11-year-old is going to get mad if they think their dolls are being thrown away, so she was hysterical. We followed him downstairs where he told her if she spoke to him like that again, she would regret it. It was then he started to remove his belt. What the hell? She pushed me towards their front door, which is just in front of the stairs, so we could run out of it, but she was sort of half laughing, as if she was trying to convince me it wasn't serious. But I could tell it was. I got out of the door, but when I turned around and waited, Kevin slammed it shut. But not the porch door. And then all I heard was Amy screaming at the top of her lungs. I was so scared, but I didn't want to leave her alone, so I just stood there. Eventually I found the courage to go back in, and I went upstairs to Amy, who was brushing her doll's hair. She smiled at me, but she has a tear-stained face. I then felt as if I had to protect her, so I continued going there and didn't tell my mom a thing. One night, I woke up thirsty and we were close enough for me to just go get a drink myself. So I went downstairs and Kevin was laying there, on the floor, in the dark, with nothing but tidy whities on, and he just stared at me. It was the creepiest thing. Just the street lamp from outside, shining through a gap in the blind, lit up the room enough to see. I didn't get myself a drink, I just ran back upstairs. I wouldn't go there after that until I knew for sure he wouldn't be there, and I didn't sleep over anymore. I'm not sure if I've ever told my mom about him, but I think she'd go and kill him. I was talking to Amy recently, and she opened up to me because she sent me her mental health assessment sheet. When she was 10, she woke up to Kevin assaulting her 15-year-old sister, who was screaming for Amy. It also stated that he beat Amy on a regular basis. Most recent was 2 years ago. He beat her up in front of a friend, and her friend called the police. So I had just gotten out of a pretty significant relationship with someone of 4 years. Nearly engaged and moving in together, etc. When things fell apart. I took a good amount of time to get back on my own and get my shit together again, when my friends began encouraging me to get back out there. Needless to say, I really wasn't wanting anything at that point, nor looking for anything, but they insisted that I at least just go out on a few casual dates, for practice, just to kind of get my skills back up when I was ready. I think they were honestly just worried about me because I've become quite hermetic. So I matched with this girl, who's home from college for the summer. She's a little out of the way from me, but was eager to meet with me. She seemed really interested and was even willing to come to my area, etc. I really wasn't all that interested, to be truthful, but my friends again encouraged this. You know, practice, whatever that means. A date doesn't mean commitment, so whatever. I want to be very clear though, that I was extremely honest and explicit with her that I was not looking for anything serious, or anything really at all. I was very forthcoming that I had gotten out of something serious and I was just kind of encouraged to explore. She persisted that it was okay and still wanted to meet, so we agreed to a casual lunch in a sports bar that week. I get there and she was already waiting for me. I was a bit put off by how much different she looked than her pictures. Not trying to sound shallow or anything, but her pics from Tinder easily had to be at least 5 years old, which I verified based on tattoos she had in person versus one she didn't have in the pics. So I was a bit thrown off by that. I wasn't the least bit attracted to her, but I was there to just have new experiences anyway, right? No big deal. I kind of felt bad for her because the entire time she seemed so incredibly shy and awkward. I even noticed her hand shaking when she reached for her glass, which I found endearing honestly. So I did my best to get her talking and try to help her feel more relaxed. I asked her questions and chatted about things I figured you chat about on dates, like where she grew up and the music she's into, school she goes to, etc. All to which I literally received one-word answers. It went on like this for about an hour and she was just not working with me at all. I tried to keep room in my heart because it was clear she was feeling anxious, and I understand that on a personal level. She then pulls out this book and says, "I got this for you." And I responded very gratefully, thanking her and inquiring what it was about. Cause hey, if someone wants to share a good read with me, I'm all for that. She looks at me funny and says in a very sudden but odd tone, "You're kidding, right?" At this point I'm very confused and just kind of look at her like, with question marks. She says, "This is your favorite book. You told me this was your favorite book." To which I said, "No, I have never even heard of this before." So we concluded that she ultimately got me confused with someone else and she must have been chatting, which I honestly found hilarious. She was embarrassed, but I made light of it and said I found it funny, cause I get it. That's Tinder culture, I guess. So as we finished lunch, and I'm still receiving one-word answers despite our funny moment, I kind of become a bit suggestive that we should conclude our date by saying I had to get back to feed my animals and do some laundry. But she came very adamant on spending more time and asked if we could do something else. I was genuinely trying to be a decent person, so I agreed, and we found a nearby park to walk. That was where shit got weird. We sat on a park bench. Mind you, it's broad daylight, and there's kids playing basketball nearby, and folks jogging past. I start trying to make conversation yet again, but only get one-word answers still. Then out of seemingly nowhere, without any warning whatsoever, she proceeds to just kiss me really aggressively, tongue and everything. I was honestly just so shocked that I stood there frozen, not knowing what the hell to do. I had this timid, shy woman who was really not made much conversation with me at all, who was so nervous she was visibly shaking, just turned into a freaking bear, mauling my face in like 0.6 seconds. My head was spinning with confusion and anxiety, and I swear it felt like it lasted forever, and I just prayed for it to stop. I was so put off and honestly a bit afraid to do or say anything. Like, what do you even do in that situation, truthfully? I was just hoping she'd pick up on my very obvious body language that I wasn't reciprocating anything at all. I was completely unprepared for a situation like this. Then some really nasty guy walks by, gawking and catcalling, and literally begins propositioning us into a three-way, and I'm just like, what the hell is going on? I need to get out of here. I was 1,000 different types of uncomfortable. I ended up managing to ward him off after telling him very politely no, more than several times. All the while she's just laughing. And I'm thinking, who even are you people? So he leaves, and I'm insisting now that I need to leave and go home. She seems to ignore what I'm saying and gets very close to my face again and says, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" When I tell you I was so nervous, I was like, I really need to get home. And she's like, "Can I come?" And I told her very firmly no. She literally tried to persuade me to let her come back to my place with me, and I had to say no more than like 3 times. So finally, I'm home and frankly just kind of shaken up. I hadn't really done the dating thing in quite a long time, but that felt very abnormal. She then texts me after she gets home and asks me out on a second date. And I was very kind, despite being made incredibly uncomfortable. And I told her I thought she was a very cool chick and I had a nice time. Lie. But that I did not feel anything there. And I reminded her I wasn't looking for anything. She then text bombed me a bunch of crazy shit, saying how she didn't understand and was so confused, that she thought I was so into her and that things went great. Did not respond to any of these messages because now she's continuing to cross my boundaries. I said what I needed to say, and I thought I was being decent by at least being honest. So the text continued, and I figured they are going to eventually stop because it was only a first date. How can someone be so upset over someone not reciprocating on a first date? They did not stop. By the text, you would have thought we just ended a 2-year relationship. Then she began calling, at which point I had to block her number. I was raised in a fairly strict but loving Christian household in a Bible Belt section of the States. My parents weren't at all unreasonable in their rules and were very well intentioned, but I broke a few along the way like most teenagers do. The summer before I started college, I began a relationship with a slightly older guy. I knew him from high school and he was attending the college I would soon be at. Johnny was a catch. He was exceptionally handsome, had been on the football team, and was on a full academic scholarship. Funny, talented, and very personable. There was little to not like about him. We bonded over our teetotalism and love of pranking. The best part is that he had his own apartment at the college, which was a 4-hour drive from my parents' house. I could easily sneak up there under the guise of visiting one of my other friends or spending the night at a local girlfriend's house. My parents didn't even know I had a boyfriend. Now I had just turned 18 and was enjoying my rebellious streak in newfound freedom. but I still lived happily under my parents' guidance and rules for a large part. They always encouraged me to be a free thinker and to ultimately figure out my own morals and values, and I ended up much like them, because they're honestly that awesome. My mom wisely encouraged me to not just sleep with anyone, and it was something I had actually held quite strongly. So while I had no qualms having sleepovers with my boyfriend, I was intent on not having sex with him. He took it pretty well and seemed to respect my decision. But one week, smack dab in the middle of summer, I had 3 days off of work in a row. A drive up to see Johnny was in order, and I began my travel early in the morning. He was excited to see me, and we had a great day. Nerf gun wars, reading Stephen King, and making out. We went out for dinner and returned for a night of shenanigans, or so I thought. Upon entering his apartment, I noticed Johnny had a box of condoms. He had tried this before, so I wasn't fazed and adamantly told him it wasn't happening. The events that unfolded following this seemingly unimportant interaction still haunt me today. Johnny's smile disappeared and his eyes went cold, hauntingly cold. I was sitting at his dining room table with my back against the wall, and he was standing at the other end of the small table. "You make me sick. I'm sick of you. All you do is play me," he said. We were serial pranksters and sarcastic in every sense of the word. While his countenance made my skin crawl, I knew he was joking. I had known Johnny for years, after all. "I've thought about this for a long time, and you're dead. I'm not doing this anymore. You make me so sick, and I hate you. You're dead to me." He was unnervingly calm, and his voice betrayed a slight hint of anger I'd never heard before. I noticed him clenching his fists, popped out veins tracing up his arms. For the first time in our relationship, I felt unsafe with him. He held my gaze, unblinking. His second-floor apartment was on campus, and it was the summer. I had seen nobody else in the building, no other cars in the parking lot. Even if I could get past him, which I definitely couldn't, my two options were unlocking the balcony door and jumping, or racing 15 feet down the hallway to the dead-bolted front door, which opened inwardly, and getting down a flight of stairs. Either scenario led to an empty parking lot. I would have to get to my car or run into the woods nearby. While athletic, I had no chance against him physically. I focused on him, half of me just knowing he was kidding. He had to be. He would break into laughter any second now, and we would return to our beautiful day. He continued talking. I can't repeat what he said. It was too graphic and specific to our location to write out in a public forum. He detailed the sexual assault he had in store for me. If I survived, I would be strangled in the nearby woods, then carted off and dumped at a secluded spot we had explored together. He motioned to some bags he had on his counter. "That's where your body will be within an hour." I had enough. His plan was way too well thought out to be impromptu. I'm small, but I'm stubborn and would fight to the death if I had to. I also have a wicked straight face when I need to. It was my turn to hold his gaze, with all the ferocity I could muster. I stood up and said the first thing that came to mind. I'm still proud of the unflinching calm I presented. Inside, I was begging God to not let me die. "You're real funny. I almost believed you for a second. Wouldn't have worked anyways, because what I was going to tell you before all that happened is, my dad asked me to come home tonight. He needs help first thing in the morning with the garden for Mom's birthday, because Kyle, my brother, hurt his back, and I told him I'd call him as soon as I was on the road, within half an hour." That was a lie, and not a particularly good one, but the delivery was convincing. I dangled my phone in his face and told him he could explain to my dad why I wasn't coming home tonight if he wanted me to stay. Johnny's mouth was agape as he stared at me. "I was just kidding," he mumbled, fists still clenched. "See ya," I chirped, pushing past him. My gamble paid off. I grabbed my purse and shuffled down the hallway, but I could feel his eyes burning through me and the electric energy in the room as I internally screamed at myself to move slowly. The deadbolt disengaged. I walked out and fought every urge to run down the stairs. I was too far from my car if he chased me to beat him, and I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me scared. I walked the entire length of the car park. I've always had a habit of parking as far out as possible, next to the woods he told me he would murder me in. I knew he was watching me the entire time. I could feel his eyes follow my every movement. As I drove out past his apartment, I saw his shadow in the balcony window. I waved as he stared. I drove a few miles to the nearest Walmart. It was only 8 and the sun was just starting to set. People milled through the parking lot, blissfully unaware of what I had just gone through. I collapsed on my steering wheel and broke down, bawling my eyes out. Then I drove the 4 hours back home. Stupidly, I didn't know how to process what happened and banished it to the recesses of my mind. I spent the next few years avoiding Johnny. The few times I thought about it, I blamed myself for being so naive. I finally told my mom 4 years after the fact and was able to process through it. It was Christmas time. My wife and I were staying at her childhood home, where her mother now lived alone. Well, not if you include the cats. The house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs. If you're picturing freshly mowed lawns, American flags, and empty sidewalks, you're picturing it right. It's a single-story home with an attached garage out front. The garage has 2 doorways, apart from the electric garage door, of course. One leads to the garden and backyard. This had an old doggy door from their days with their dear old Max. Rest in peace, Max. That they covered with a piece of nailed-in wood. That had always made me slightly uncomfortable before, but I figured it had been that way for years, so what's the worst that could happen? The second door leads to the kitchen. It could stop a mouse, but not much else. Definitely not something that wanted in, or someone. We were asleep in my wife's childhood bedroom at the front of the house, 3 a.m. I was in that deep, dark recess of sleep. Then I heard it. The scream. "What are you doing?" Was my mother-in-law's voice echoing down the hallway. To me, lost in a sea of sleep, it sounded like a jet engine roaring past my eardrum. I bolted up. What happened next happened in a matter of seconds. But about that scream, even though I was dead asleep, I heard enough of it to sense an urgency behind it. This wasn't an "oh you scared me" type of scream. This was different, and I knew it. Not consciously, but the lizard part of my brain, that piece we retained from our primitive ancestors, knew something was wrong. I watch and read a fair amount of true crime, and this scream awakened that horrible fear. The one that says, this can't really be happening to me, can it? Honestly, at that time of night, it sounded like someone was about to be murdered. You ever wonder if you're a fight or flight type of individual? I always have, and I came to know something about myself after this night. I'm a fighter, because I leaped out of bed and growled. Yes, I growled, in the manliest voice I could muster. "I'm gonna kill you," and I took off running. I tore open the bedroom door and ran into the hallway. There at the end, I saw my mother-in-law, nightgown on, look of utter shock on her face. She was standing still. We make eye contact as I continue toward her. Then she turns her head and looks directly in the kitchen. I hurry past her and round the corner into the kitchen. The hollow core door is obliterated, with shards being scattered everywhere. I look through the open frame and see the electric garage doors open as well, and I push ahead. As I run into the garage, I hear it. The sound of someone hopping into a running car, just out of view. Just as I make it onto the driveway, I see a car peeling out from the sidewalk adjacent to the house. But with my adrenaline still pumping, and who am I to say no to adrenaline? So like an idiot, I run barefoot after this car. I give a good go, but I'm no Michael Johnson. And even he couldn't catch a speeding car. It soon vanishes down the street, and I'm left all alone. The police showed up within 3 minutes, which I have to say makes me feel a lot more at ease with my mother-in-law living there. They took our statements. My mother-in-law said she heard a noise, the hollow core door being kicked in, and walked into the kitchen where she encountered a burglar, a small framed woman. The police theorized she was working as part of a team. Her job was to squeeze through the doggy door, kick in the hollow core, and open the electric garage door for her accomplice. According to the police, the burglars most likely thought nobody was home. Fortunately, my mother-in-law must have caught her off guard and scared her, in addition to my manly growl, of course. But it feels good to know that everyone was safe, and to learn that I guess I've got a little fight in me. And for the record, we bought the heaviest goddamn wooden door you've ever seen to replace that hollow core. I'd like to see a mouse try and get through that. When I was 19, I moved from Oregon to Florida to be with my boyfriend at the time. I was thinking white sand beaches and Mickey Mouse, but instead I got the swamp, bugs, and dirt roads. We lived in this little town called Hawthorne, just outside of Gainesville. It has legit one stoplight and maybe 4 stores. Dollar General, Steve's Market, Eckert's Pharmacy, and Sonny's Barbecue. Whoopee. Anyway, I got a job at the defunct Eckert's in the middle of town. It was next to the grocery store, so everyone shopped there. After about 3 months or so of working there, I walked in to start my shift one day, and the manager pulled me into his office. Laid out on his desk was about 30 to 40 opened letters, all addressed by hand, to me. "Do you know this person?" my manager asked. "No," I said. And he told me to read one, so I picked the cheerful yellow one. Inside were 2 handwritten letters and a magazine cutout of a woman with long blonde hair, just like me. As my manager watched on, I read the letter. I skipped around a lot of confusion, desperately trying to find out why I'm in this room. From what I read, it was mostly someone imagining what spending time with me would be like. A lot of it was sexual in nature. There were description and comments about my hair, washing it, smelling it, and something about the moonlight. A few sentences were highlighted, others were underlined. My first thought was, am I getting fired? "Do you know this guy, David Elrod?" I said yes, I think so. The tall, lanky guy with thick glasses and frizzy dark blonde hair. It's the regular who comes in a couple times a week to pick up Diet Coke and medication for his mom. Late 20s and obviously socially or mentally challenged. On rare occasions, he would make small talk as I rang up his soda. Once or twice, he would linger at my register or stare at me, but I figured he was just trying to adjust his eyes or had poor social cues. Harmless compared to some of the other people I had met in Florida, so I didn't pay him any mind. Until that day in Eckert's office. I knew he wrote the letters because of a strange encounter 2 weeks earlier. While working, he came up behind me and touched or caressed my hair. I had to remove it from his hands and he apologized. Weird. No harm though, I went back to work. After telling my manager this, he informed me that the customer was going to be banned from the store and I was being sent home while they worked out the details. What details? Confused, I walked out of the store and drove home. That day was strange. 2 hours after I got home from my non-shift at work, there was a knock on my door. I look out the window and see what resembles a SWAT team. What the hell is going on, I thought. I saw men in tactical gear with large weapons, 2 men dressed in suits, and several uniformed police. In what seemed like slow motion at the time, I opened the door. A female officer holds up a few oddly familiar letters. "Can we come in and talk to you about these?" she asked. Realizing everyone in town had read these letters, I wanted to pass out. I barely even know the guy, I told him. "We have a seat on my couch," and she begins to speak. Out of the corner of my eye, I see my boyfriend shooting me dirty looks from the bedroom. The female officer mentions the letters from Eckerd's and attempting to issue a trespassing notice. They wanted to speak to him directly, she says, because her whole department is aware of David. The officers confronted him at his residence and attempted to evoke the trespassing notice from Eckerd's store. Apparently, he was not happy about this. He insisted for over 45 minutes how this was all a big mistake and how I wanted to talk to him. He was combative and persistent, but they decided to pursue stalking charges. Stalking charges? I asked. She continues, you need to be aware that David killed and partially dismembered his mother when he was 12 years old. He was released from a juvenile psychiatric facility less than 4 years ago. We found disturbing materials at his home, she continued. We believe he's been stalking you. My mind was wandering at this point. David was arrested the next day for stalking me after he was found in the Eckerd's parking lot. But the last official word was he went back to the psychiatric hospital, at least temporarily. I didn't have the chance to read the letters in full before they were entered into some vault of evidence, nor did they explain what they found at his house, so I never had the complete picture of what was happening. My boyfriend at the time was a huge dick about the whole thing, so I moved back to Oregon a week later. Besides, who wants to hang around when Norman Bates is fixated on you? I-22 female worked at a mall when I was a young adult. Oftentimes, it would be dark by the time I got to the bus stop, and there were lots of druggies and creeps around. But they didn't bother me most of the time, and mostly stayed away for the most part. One night, I was walking a little later than usual, and I saw a truck and a guy talking to a girl that I assumed was in her teens, as she looked young. I thought nothing of it. A lot of teens had to be picked up from the mall as they worked in the food court and sometimes on weekends got late night shifts. I thought maybe it was her dad picking her up. I honestly did. As I got closer, I could see that she was upset, but I thought they had a fight. The guy looked up a little angrily at me as I sat down. I heard him saying to the girl, "Hey honey, you should come home with me now. Mom is worried." She backed up slowly, and that's when I looked up, and she was looking at me with a terrified face. This man was clearly drinking, and he smelled of liquor, but not stumbling around. Now I knew something was wrong. My stomach sank. The bus wasn't going to be there for another half an hour, and I was a small 5-foot woman myself. I started to get the feeling that this guy wasn't her father. He said, "Come on honey, let's get in the truck." "Get in the truck now, it's late." I didn't know whether this man was her father or not, but I decided I need to do something. I said, "Hey, wow, I haven't seen you in a long time," to the girl. I started chatting with her and she sat down ignoring him. He was visibly angry and went to the truck. I thought to leave, hopefully. The girl sat next to me and explained the man wasn't her father. She didn't know who he was, but he was trying to get her to go with him. I said, "Okay, just act natural and keep refusing." The guy came back up to us with his phone up to his ear and a pipe. "Okay, dumb bitch, get in the truck. Your mom's pissed. And lady, you need to mind your business with a parent and child." I told him he clearly wasn't her father and he should leave before security cameras captured him doing something illegal. He looked like he just realized they existed, but decided he went too far, I guess already, and walks towards us. He grabbed the girl by her arm and dragged her as she struggled. I tried to push him off, but he told me to not get between a father and daughter. I saw a security guard in the window and he mouthed, "Are you okay?" I mouthed back I was not and shook my head. He immediately started to unlock the door and grab his phone, I assume calling the police. The creepy man saw this guy coming and decided finally to leave, swearing and speeding off. The girl was visibly shaken up and crying. Her real parents came not too long after the incident, and I left with a few words to the police about my side and giving them my number. I'm glad I was there, because I have not seen the guy since and I don't know what might have happened to that young girl. I learned she was only 15. At one point, he even tried to convince me I was also his daughter. This event took place quite a few years ago, so unfortunately I don't remember everything that happened, but I remember nearly all of it. Anyways, this happened when I was around 4 or 5 years old on Easter Sunday. My family always gathers at my grandmother's house to celebrate holidays and birthdays, so as we do every holiday, my mother and I started our hour-long trip to her house. My mother prefers to live away from all this city commotion, which explains the long drive. We were probably around 20 minutes away from our destination when my mom noticed that we were a little low on gas, so we pulled into this old, almost rustic-looking gas station with just a handful of customers inside. It was red and white with a few festive decorations outside and lots of Easter stickers on the 2 large glass windows that were on either side of the door. My mom, having taught me to not talk to strangers nor open the car doors for anyone but her, trusted me enough to leave me in the car alone as she went inside briefly to pay for the gas. She told me that she would be right back before going into the gas station. It felt nice that day, so the windows in the car were down so we could feel the breeze while driving instead of the AC. While I was waiting on my mom, I remember adjusting the colorful paper clippings in my Easter basket next to me, then looking out of the back seat window. When I look over, I saw a tall, older man, maybe around 30 years old, approaching my window. He crouched down slightly and looked at me. "Hi there, what's your name?" I remember him saying. At this moment, I remembered that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, so I told the man that my mom says I shouldn't speak to strangers. He then replied with, "Well, we can be friends then. My name's Charlie, and now that you know, I guess I'm not a stranger, huh?" At the time, I thought that he was right. In my mind, I thought since a stranger is someone you don't know, this man wasn't a stranger anymore because I knew him. The man and I had a short conversation that I don't quite remember. All I remember is him telling me that I had a nice Easter basket. At this point, I started to get a sick feeling in my stomach, but being a child, of course, I didn't know why. My mom then walked out of the gas station and noticed the man immediately and began approaching the car quickly, asking the man what he thinks he's doing. The man seems to panic and he pulls my door handle violently. He quickly realized it was locked, thankfully, and proceeded to reach into my window and grab me by one of my wrists in an attempt to pull me out. This obviously scared me a lot, causing me to panic and pull against him on instinct. This caused him to let go and take off running. My mom quickly ran to the car and I unlocked the doors. She grabbed me and pulled me into an almost painful bear hug, then inspected me closely, repeatedly asking if I was okay. I ended up with a slight bruise and redness on my arm where he grabbed me, but other than that, I was just shaken up. The reality of what had just happened set in at this moment, and I remember just crying and holding on to my mom right after I said I was okay. I don't remember anything after this point, but I recently asked my mom about it, and she said that she called the police immediately after. To this day, my mom still says that this was the most frightening moment of her life, and claims that if she had gotten there any later and came back to an empty car, she wouldn't have been able to live with herself. This happened a very long time ago. I'm guessing back in 2006, and I couldn't have been older than 4 at the time. Yet I vividly remember the fear I felt during this encounter. It was an early summer morning and the sun was up, but few people were out. In fact, the streets were practically dead that morning. My mom decided to take my sister, only 1 year old, seated in a stroller, and I to throw away some garbage at the garbage station. I might add that the garbage station is kind of secluded from nearby houses, bordering one of those deep, dark forests of eastern Sweden. Since I was only 4 years old when this happened, the memories from the incident have faded a lot. However, my mom remembers most of it, if not all of it. She says that upon entering the garbage station, she immediately got an eerie feeling of being watched. I remember that feeling too. I felt creeped out, even though I didn't know why I was scared. I guess I could sense my mom's fear. Walking along that secluded garbage station, my mom suddenly stopped and told me something. She said my name, and she said to hold onto the stroller as hard as I can and to not let go no matter what. That's my most vivid memory I have of this, and I don't think I'll ever forget those words. I'll at least never forget how they made me feel. It was as if my blood turned to ice. I just froze. My mom sounded stern, but even a toddler can sense when someone's scared shitless. My mom was definitely afraid of something. And for me, the rest is just a blur. I don't remember much after this, so I'll let the rest of the story be told from the perspective of my mother. This is the recollection of her experience, recalled to the best of my abilities, in my own words. Not far from where we were standing, a truck was parked with a man seated in the front. Nothing unusual at first. A lot of truck drivers stopped to rest by the side of the road, but this man was staring, and he wouldn't stop staring. He stared right at me, examining my body with the determined gaze of a predator, gluing the three of us in sight. He truly seemed pleased by the fear he had instilled in our faces. In his eyes, there was something else, almost as if they didn't belong to a human, but rather to a predator. I felt like prey, stuck in the claws of a lion. I just couldn't move. That's when he smiled at me. I remember that dead smile, those cold, calculating eyes, and the way he licked his lips, almost as if to say, I could kill you if I wanted to. I believe this was the point in time into the strange encounter when my mom told me to hold on to the stroller, and to hold on tightly and to not let go. My mom was a small woman, only about 5 foot and 100 pounds, and she could have easily been overpowered by the overweight man in the truck. My mom later admitted she was afraid he'd jump out of the truck and knock her out, possibly assaulting her or even kidnapping me or my 1-year-old sister. We bolted out of there. We didn't throw away much garbage that morning. We just turned around and walked home as fast as a mom can with a stroller and a 4-year-old toddler by her side. We've never talked about what happened that day, up until very recently. The incident has always lingered somewhere in the back of my mind as that weird thing that happened when I was a child. And every time I walk past that garbage station, I get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. As previously mentioned, this happened around 2006. Fast forward to 2008, the face of a 10-year-old little girl called Engla was printed across the front page of every newspaper in sight. She had been abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered. And the perpetrator was an overweight truck driver named Anders Eklund, now known as one of Sweden's most infamous killers. He was charged with the murder of Engla, alongside the sexual assault and murder of a woman named Pernilla. He's also suspected of abducting another little girl who's still missing, making him a pedophile, a serial rapist, and a serial killer. My mom says that when she saw Eklund's picture in the paper, especially when she saw those cold, familiar eyes, she knew he was the creepy man from the garbage station. That early morning all those years ago.